Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight, in 5 true unexplained events reported by cemetery workers, we step into the quiet edges of the world where the hum of the living fades, and only the wind moves through the graves. These are the stories witnessed by those who walk the cemeteries at night, events with no explanation, footsteps with no owner, and moments that make even lifelong. Workers refuse to look over their shoulder. Every account you're about. 2 here is retaken from cemetery workers who stood alone among the headstones and felt something watching from the dark. My goal this month is to reach 6 subscribers. Almost 90% of viewers wander in, listen, and vanish into the dark without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Join the darkness. Subscribe now. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what hour of the night it is for you. And if you've ever felt something strange in a cemetery near your home, type its name below. Because when the world sleeps and the soil settles, some things beneath it do not stay still. Kill the lights. Silence the world. Take a slow breath. And let us begin. My name is Gregory, and I'm from Stillwater, Minnesota. Most people only know Stillwater because of the river and the old lift bridge. The tourist stuff? They come in the summer, walk up and down Main Street, eat ice cream, maybe take some pictures of the hills, then they go home. They don't really see the town the way the people who live here see it. I live a few blocks away from all that. Up the hill, on a quieter street, where the houses get older and the sidewalks are a little uneven. My place is a narrow 2-story house with peeling white paint and a porch that leans a little to one side. It's nothing special. What makes it different is what's across the street. Right across from my front porch, there's a small cemetery. It's not huge, not some sprawling thing. You could walk from one end to the other in maybe 2 minutes. It's old, though. Victorian era, that kind of age. The headstones are worn down in places, names rub soft from rain and snow and fingers. There's a black iron fence around it, the kind with the thin, pointed bars. It squeaks when the wind really gets going. Most of the plots are family sections. You see the same last name 5-10 times in a row. Same dates repeated, same years of death lining up. A couple of stone obelisks, a few angels with broken wings, but mostly just rectangles of gray and white. And near the middle, a grave that's always decorated. Always. Flowers in summer, little wreaths in winter, sometimes just a single candle in a glass jar. I didn't think much of it when I moved in. I'm a data analyst. I work for an insurance company that has an office closer to the cities, but they let me work from home most of the time. My cousin Emily moved in with me about a year after I bought the place. She got a job at the hospital over in Stillwater, something in scheduling and records, and needed somewhere cheap to stay. We weren't especially close growing up, but we got along well enough. Daily life was pretty quiet. I'd get up around 7, make coffee, answer emails, get into whatever spreadsheets or reports needed doing. Emily's schedule was all over the place. Early shifts, late shifts, weekends. Sometimes I'd hear her come in after midnight. The front door clicking, the floorboards creaking, the muffled sound of the fridge door opening. From the living room window and the front porch, the cemetery is just there. Part of the view, like a park. In the mornings, I'd sit with my coffee on the porch and watch the light come up over the trees in the back of it. There are a couple of old maples, and what I'm pretty sure is a willow right in the center. It's branches dragging down over a cluster of stones. It looks peaceful, honestly. In the fall, the leaves blow through the iron bars and pile up around the stones. And you can hear them scrape along the pavement when the wind picks up. The town itself is quiet at night. You hear the occasional car going down the hill, or a dog barking a few houses over. If the wind's right, you catch the faint sound of a train horn from across the river. Sometimes the church bells downtown drift up the hill, all muffled and soft. It all blends together into this low background noise you don't even really notice after a while. For the first year or so, the cemetery felt like nothing more than scenery. I'd see people come by on Sundays, leave flowers, stand there for a bit, then walk away. A couple of teenagers would cut through it sometimes, even though there's technically a sign asking people not to. They'd hop the fence, the iron rattling, sneakers crunching on the gravel path that winds through the middle. Emily made jokes about it at first. She'd say things like, "At least your neighbors are quiet." Or if we ever need extra storage, there's a lot of underground space across the street. That kind of thing. Dark humor, but harmless. I'd just roll my eyes and tell her she was morbid. I remember the first small thing. It wasn't dramatic. It was February, so it was cold and dry, that kind of cold that makes your nostrils sting when you step outside. There was a little snow on the ground, not much, just a crust. I went out to grab a package off the porch in the evening. The street was empty. The cemetery was this dark shape under the yellow streetlight. The iron gate was standing wide open. That gate is heavy. It drags on the ground if you don't lift it just right. Usually it stays shut. The city guy who comes to mow and trim, he always swings it closed when he leaves. I'd heard it earlier that day. That loud metal-on-metal screech. I stood there with the box in my hands, watching the gate move a little in the wind. It didn't slam or anything. It just rocked back and forth, squeaking. "Guess somebody forgot," I said out loud, mostly to myself. Emily came up behind me. She had her scrubs on, bag slung over her shoulder, heading out for a late shift. "Creepy," she said. "You closing it?" "I guess," I said. "It feels weird to just leave it." We walked across the street together. The snow crunched under our boots. The cold air made our breath look like smoke. I grabbed the gate and pulled it shut. It stuck halfway, then jerked forward and banged into the latch. "Needs oil," Emily said. "It's the city's problem," I said back. We went home. That was it. Nothing more that night. No jump scare, no shadowy figure. Just a gate someone probably forgot to latch. Except a few days later, it was open again. Same deal. Cold evening, I stepped outside to take the trash out, and there it was, wide open, swinging slightly. There hadn't been anyone there all day. I'd been working at the table by the front window, so I knew. No city truck, no visitors, nobody. Stillwater isn't exactly a high-traffic place in winter. You notice when someone pulls up. This time I watched the empty street for a bit. Then I crossed, pushed the gate shut again, and listened to it scrape and squeal. When I came back in, Emily was on the couch, scrolling on her phone. "Was it open again?" she asked. "Yeah, I didn't see anybody." She shrugged. "Kids? Maybe. Or the wind, I don't know." "The wind isn't lifting that thing," I said. "Well, maybe it's..." She made a spooky face, wiggling her fingers. "The residents." "It's very funny," I said, but I laughed. "That's what you do." "You joke." Over the next month, little things piled up. Nothing huge, nothing that would make a good story on its own. Off. I started noticing fresh flowers on that one decorated grave at weird times. I'd see it empty one morning, just grass and the stone. And then by late afternoon, there'd be a neat bunch of daisies sitting there. Or a single red rose, or one of those cheap mixed bouquets from the grocery store. I never saw anyone leave them. I kept telling myself it was just timing. People came while I was in the bathroom or grabbing coffee or whatever. The porch light started acting up too. It's a motion sensor light, the kind that flicks on when someone comes up the steps. It also faces the cemetery, so sometimes a car going past or a squirrel or something sets it off. But around that time, it started triggering more often. I'd be at my laptop after dinner, and suddenly the front of the house would flash bright. I'd get up, look out, and see nothing. No car, no person, no animal. Just the fence, the stones, and that one grave in the middle. Pale and square in the light. "It keeps doing that," I told Emily one night. "It's probably just broken." She looked up from the kitchen where she was making tea. "Yeah, or it's picking up something weird. Like a heat thing. Or, ghosts. Can you not?" I said. She grinned. "Sorry, you freaked out." "I'm not freaked out," I said. "It's just annoying." But it did start to feel unsettling. Little things added up. The gate, the flowers, the light going on and off when the street was empty. One Saturday afternoon, I walked over there just to look around. I'd never actually gone into the cemetery since moving in. It felt weird, like intruding on something private. But that day it was sunny, and the snow was mostly melted. The ground was soft under my shoes, muddy in places. A crow yelled from the top of one of the bare trees in the back. I could hear a dog barking a few streets over. The stones were closer together than they looked from my porch. A lot of them were leaning or sunk on one side. Most of the names didn't mean anything to me. Peterson, Larson, Johnson, typical Midwest names. Whole clusters of family plots surrounded by low stone borders. The decorated grave was in the center section. Near the willow, it was a simple gray stone, not very tall. There were lambs carved on some of the children's stones nearby, but this one was plain. I don't know why, but I expected it to be a kid's grave. It wasn't. The dates put the person in their late 30s. The last name was Jensen. First name, Daniel. Someone had left fresh flowers there that morning. White lilies, still wet from the store water, stuffed into a little green plastic holder pushed into the ground. There was a faint artificial smell to them, under the damp earth smell. I stood there longer than I meant to. It felt like I'd interrupted something. When I went to step back, my foot slipped a little in the mud. I heard the wet suck under my shoe, and in that moment, everything went totally quiet. No crow, no dog, nothing. Just my breath and the faint tick of the porch light across the street turning off again. I walked home slowly, trying not to look like I was hurrying later that week. I stopped by the small grocery store a few blocks away. The woman at the checkout, Linda, has lived in Stillwater forever. She knows everybody's business, or at least she acts like she does. "You're the one in the White House across from Oak Ridge, right?" she asked as she rang up my stuff. "Yeah," I said. "Didn't know it had a name." "All the old cemeteries do," she said. "That one's been there since the 1800s. You like it okay over there?" "It's fine," I said. "Kind of quiet, except the gate keeps opening by itself." She paused, a loaf of bread in her hands. "By itself? I mean, I don't see who's opening it," I said quickly. "Just, I look out, and it's wide open." Linda gave a small frown. Not scared exactly. More like she'd remembered something she didn't like. "Kids," she said finally, but it sounded forced. "Always messing around up there." "Hey." "Yeah," I said. "Probably kids." On my way out, she called after me, "You keep your doors locked at night, honey." It was the way she said it that stuck with me. Not like general advice. More specific, after that, things sort of blurred together. I started hearing footsteps at night. Not inside at first. Across the street, I'd be in bed, half asleep, and I'd hear gravel crunch, like someone walking along the path in the cemetery. Slow steps, then a pause. Another few steps, another pause. I told myself it was teenagers, or a dog walker who cut through. Stillwater safe. People do stuff like that. Except when I got up and went to the window, there was never anyone there. Just darkness and the faint glow from the streetlight catching the tops of the stones. One night, the insects just stopped. We had an early warm spell in April, and the bugs came out all at once. You could hear them in the grass and the trees, this constant high buzzing sound. I was on the porch with Emily, both of us in hoodies. Drinking beer and complaining about work. She was mid-sentence when the sound cut off. Like someone turned down a volume knob. We both noticed it at the same time. "That's weird," I said. Emily stopped talking and listened. The only sound was a car far off, and our porch steps creaking when I shifted my weight. "Maybe it dropped a few degrees," she said. "Does that do it?" "I don't think it works that fast," I said. "Maybe they all died," she said, trying to be funny. But her voice sounded off. A crow called once, loud and harsh, and then that cut off too. The wind picked up a little, moving the willow branches in the cemetery. They scraped against each other with a dry, papery sound, and the porch light clicked on. Flooding the front yard and the iron fence with harsh white light, we both turned to look. The beam hit straight onto Daniel Jensen's grave. The lilies from earlier in the week were gone. In their place was a small glass jar with a candle in it. Unlit. I didn't see anyone put that there. Emily said quietly, "You're not watching out the window all day." I said. "I sit there for work." I'd notice. We didn't say anything else. After a minute or two, the insects started up again, like nothing happened. I think the first time I really got scared was the night. I heard my own front door open when I knew Emily wasn't home. It was around 10:30. I was sitting at the dining table with my laptop, finishing up some reports. The house was mostly dark, except for the lamp above me. Outside, the wind was light. Every so often, a car would go by on the main road a few blocks away. I heard the lock turn, quiet but clear. Then the door latch clicked. The hinges creaked the way they always do, this long, complaining sound. I heard the door shut again, that soft thud of wood against the frame. "Hey, you back early?" I called out. Emily had a late shift that night, so it didn't make sense, but sometimes they sent her home. If it was slow, no answer him. I said, standing up. I walked to the hallway. The front door was closed. The deadbolt was still turned, just like I'd left it. I checked it with my hand to be sure. Solid, no draft, no gap. The porch light came on. Its glow leaked in around the sides of the curtain. I pulled the door open and stepped onto the porch. The air hit me, cooler than I expected. The street was empty. The cemetery was a black shape with a few gray rectangles sticking up. The gate stood half open, not wide this time, just angled. I listened for a long time. No footsteps, no voices. Just a distant train horn and the rattle of a loose screen door from somewhere down the block. I locked the door again, top and bottom, and told myself I'd just misheard. Old house, settling wood, whatever. Brains fill in patterns all the time. When Emily came home an hour later, I didn't tell her about it. I didn't want to give her more material for her graveyard jokes. The next morning, found muddy footprints in the front hall. Not a lot. Just 3, maybe 4 partial prints leading from the door toward the living room. They were faint, like someone had wiped their shoes on the mat first and then walked in with what was left. The pattern looked like a work boot. Not my size. Not Emily's. "You track something in?" I asked her when she came downstairs. She shook her head. "No, I came in the back last night, remember? I texted you because the front porch light was acting up, flicking on and off." I had missed that text. My phone was on silent in the bedroom. "Must be old," I said. Even though I'd swept the floor 2 days ago, I cleaned them up and tried not to think about it. Around that time, I started waking up at 3 in the morning, not to any particular sound. I would just snap awake, heart beating fast, no dream I could recall. The house would be silent. Sometimes I'd lie there and listen. The old radiator pipes would knock once in a while, this hollow metallic sound. The fridge would hum. Once or twice, I heard what sounded like whispering, but it could have been wind dragging along the eaves. One of those nights, I heard someone say my name. It was soft. Right outside my bedroom door, it felt like Greg. Emily calls me Greg, but it didn't sound like her. The voice was a little lower. I think that's what got to me. I stared at the ceiling for a bit, then cleared my throat. Yeah, nothing answered. No footsteps, no door creaks. After a minute, I got up and opened the bedroom door. The hallway was dark. The light from the street snuck in through the edges of the curtains downstairs, making a kind of faint stripe pattern on the walls. Emily's door was closed. I stood there and listened. I could hear her snoring lightly on the other side. She's a loud sleeper. There was no way she'd been standing outside my room whispering my name in a different voice. Then sprinted into bed and started snoring in the few seconds it took me to get up. The next day, I almost mentioned it to her, then stopped. I didn't like the way it sounded in my head. I didn't want to say it out loud and make it more real. Instead, I went down to City Hall. I told myself it was out of curiosity. I wanted to know more about the cemetery across the street. I went on my lunch break. The building is old too, all brick and narrow hallways. The clerk at the records desk was a guy named Mark I'd seen around town. "I live across from Oak Ridge Cemetery," I said. "I was just wondering if you have any information about it. Old maps or plot records or something?" He looked at me for a second, like he was trying to decide how much effort he wanted to put into this. Then he sighed and stood up. Double quotes. "Yeah, we got the burial records and ownership stuff," he said. "What do you want exactly?" "Family history." "I don't know," I said. "Just who's buried there, I guess." He led me to a back room with metal shelves and a faint smell of paper and dust. There were big binders labeled by decade. He pulled out one from the late 1800s and another. "It's from the early 1900s. That's when most of those lots were sold," he said. "You can look through, but don't take them out of the room, okay?" I flipped through the lists. Names, dates of purchase, lot numbers. Jensen came up a few times. Different first names. Eventually I found Daniel. Jensen Daniel. Lot 23, Section B, date of death. 1998, I read. I frowned. That didn't fit with what Linda said about the cemetery? I thought it was all older than that. "Hey Mark," I called. "I thought Oak Ridge was all like Victorian era," he shrugged. "Mostly they used it into the 90s for some family plots. Then they started sending people to the new cemetery on the other side of town." "Why, you know someone in there?" I hesitated. "No, I just see his grave from my house. Someone keeps leaving stuff on it." Mark walked over, glanced at the page. For a second, something passed over his face. Not shock, more like recognition he wished he didn't have. "Yeah," he said slowly. "Some families hang on to things longer than others." "Do you know who he was?" I asked. Mark closed the binder. "I should get back to the desk," he said. "If you want copies, you can put in a request." It was such an abrupt change I almost laughed. "Is there a reason you don't want to talk about it?" I said. He gave me a tight smile. "Everybody's got their own history around here. Some of it doesn't belong to us to tell." On the way home, the wind had picked up. Dry leaves grabbed at my ankles along the sidewalk, even though it was spring and most of them should have been gone. A truck rattled by and I watched its reflection slide over the iron fence around the cemetery. That night, Emily finally said something first. "Have you noticed," she said, standing in the kitchen in her socks, "that our porch light only really freaks out when it's pointing at that one grave?" I poured coffee into my mug. "What do you mean?" "It's fine when people walk up, or when I take the trash out," she said. "But when it flickers for no reason, it's always the same angle, right at the Jensen one." I checked. I took a sip of coffee I didn't want. "You're looking for patterns," I said. "That's what brains do. They find patterns in noise." "You're the data guy," she said. "What do your numbers say about the muddy footprints we didn't make?" I didn't have an answer for that. Instead, I said, "It's an old house. Old wiring. We'll get the light fixed." "Sure," she said. She turned away, then turned back. "Hey, Greg. Does the name Daniel mean anything to you?" The way she said it made my skin prickle. "No," I said too quickly. "Why?" She shrugged. "Just wondered." Later, when she'd gone to work, I pulled out the cardboard box I kept in the hall closet. It had all the random paper you accumulate old tax returns. It's mortgage papers, closing documents from when I bought the house. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe nothing. Maybe something obvious and stupid. I flipped through the inspection report, the property disclosures. The survey, on one of the older photocopied pages from the previous owner's file, I saw the name. Former deed holder of adjacent parcel, Jensen. Daniel R. I stared at it until the letters blurred. I'd never noticed it before. Why would I? It was buried in a paragraph about setbacks and easement rights. Adjacent parcel. The cemetery. I sat back on the floor and listened. The radiator ticked. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard popped like someone had stepped on it. That was around the time the line between over there and over here really started to blur. We'd come home and find the front gate closed. When I knew I'd left it open, not the cemetery gate. Little things inside the house would be in the wrong place. My keys would be on the side table instead of the hook by the door. Emily's phone charger moved from the outlet by the couch to the one in the hall. "Did you move this?" Became a daily question. "No," became the daily answer. One Sunday afternoon, Emily was at work, and I was alone in the house. The sun was out. You could hear kids playing a few streets over, the occasional bicycle tires on pavement. I was on the couch, half watching a game, half reading something on my phone. The porch light clicked on. In the daytime, that shouldn't happen. It's set not to trigger when there's enough ambient light. I muted the TV and listened. There was a slow, steady sound on the front steps. Not heavy, not running. Just a measured creak. 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 Like someone walking up one step at a time. I held my breath. The steps stopped. The screen door gave a soft metallic rattle, the way it does when someone touches it lightly. Then nothing. No knock. No footsteps going back down. No car door closing. Just a gust of wind and a dry hiss as it moved through the branches over the street. Must have sat there for 5 minutes before I could make myself get up. My legs felt shaky in a stupid way, like I'd run up a hill. When I opened the door, the street was empty. The cemetery gate was closed. I looked down at the mat. There were no new footprints. Across the street, the candle on Daniel Jensen's grave was lit. I hadn't seen anyone go in. The flame hardly moved, even though I could feel the wind on my face. That night, Emily and I didn't talk much. We both kept turning the TV volume up a little too high, then lowering it again when the house made a noise. I started thinking about moving. Just a vague idea at first. I'd catch myself looking at listings online during lunch, scrolling past neat little townhouses with no cemeteries in sight. I didn't tell Emily about that. I did ask her casually if she liked living there. "It's fine," she said. "Why are you actually freaked out now?" "No," I said. Then, just wondering. A couple of weeks later, I stopped by the grocery store again. Linda was there, ringing people up. The bell above the door jingled when I walked in. It was late afternoon, that kind of flat gray light you get before rain. "You still over by Oak Ridge?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. She hesitated. "You settling in okay?" I shrugged. "Yeah, I guess. Can I ask you something kind of weird?" She looked around. There were no other customers close enough to listen. "Depends how weird," she said. "Do you know anything about a guy named Daniel Jensen?" I asked. I saw his name in the records, and on a grave in the cemetery. Linda's expression went flat. Not angry, not scared. Just closed. "Some folks," she said slowly, "don't let go of their people easy. That's all. Was he from around here?" I asked. "Everybody in that place is from around here," she said. "Best thing you can do is be respectful and mind your own business." "I live right across from it," I said. "Kinda hard not to notice things." She bagged my groceries. Her hands moved a little faster than usual. "If you're smart," she said, "you lock your doors, you keep your lights on, and you don't go counting headstones at night." She slid the bag across. "And you don't go calling out names that aren't yours." It was such a specific thing to say that I didn't know how to answer. That night, when I woke up at 3 again, the house felt different. Heavier somehow. It was colder than it should have been. The heat had kicked off hours ago, but this was more than that. The air felt thick in my throat. From somewhere downstairs, very faint, I heard the crunch of gravel. Not outside. Inside. Like someone walking slowly across a floor covered in small stones. I sat up, listening. The sound went on for a few seconds, then stopped. Then started again, closer. For a second, I had this stupid image of someone dragging the cemetery path in behind them. Spilling it through the front door, spreading it across our floors. I got up, because not getting up felt worse. The hallway floor was cold under my feet. I moved slowly, hand on the wall. The sound stopped as soon as I reached the top of the stairs. I flipped the light on. The sudden brightness felt like a shock. The living room below was empty. The front door was closed. The porch light outside glared through the glass window in the door, casting rectangles of white onto the floor. There was nothing on the floor itself. No gravel, no dirt, no footprints. Emily's door opened behind me. She squinted in the light. "What are you doing?" She mumbled. "Thought I heard something," I said. My voice sounded thin. She rubbed her eyes. "You're jumpy lately," I said. "Maybe." She looked past me at the front door. "Did you lock it?" "Yeah," I said. "I always do." She nodded and went back to bed. I didn't tell her that when I first glanced at it. Just for a second, it looked like the deadbolt was turned the wrong way. The next day, I worked from the office in the cities, just to get some distance. The hum of other people's conversations, the copy machines, the constant little office noises. They felt weirdly comforting. When I got home after dark, Emily wasn't there. She left a note saying she was staying at a friend's place after their shift. The house felt too quiet. I put my bag down and went straight to the front window. Pulling back the curtain, the cemetery was lit by the streetlight and the thin glow of the moon. The gate was closed. The willow branches moved in the wind like fingers. The decorated grave had a fresh bouquet on it again. Bright red flowers this time. I couldn't tell what kind from that distance. On our side of the street, the porch light clicked on. I wasn't moving. Nothing else was either. It just came on by itself, buzzing faintly. I stood there a long time, my hand on the curtain, watching the line between the sidewalk and the cemetery fence. I don't know when I noticed the pattern. Maybe it was that night. Maybe I'd been edging toward it for weeks. The disturbances, whatever you want to call them, only really happened when I was looking away. The gate open when I hadn't been watching, the flowers appearing between glances, the footprints on the floor overnight, the candle lighting when my back was turned. They only move when I'm not looking. I thought, and right then, standing at the window, I had this strong, stupid urge to turn around, to look at the front hall behind me, the stairs, the shadows on the wall, to see if anything shifted the instant my eyes left the cemetery. I didn't. I kept my gaze on the iron fence, and that one grave in the middle until my eyes burned. Eventually, the porch light timed out and shut off. The front of the house dropped into shadow. Out across the street, the bouquet on Daniel Jensen's grave moved a little in the breeze, petals shivering. I still live here. I still go to work and pay bills and laugh at dumb shows with Emily. I still sit on the porch some mornings with my coffee, looking at the willow and the rows of stones, pretending it's just a view. I've stopped trying to explain any of it. I don't ask Linda questions. I don't look up old records. I don't say his name out loud at night. When I hear the porch light click on and stay on longer than it should, I don't go to the window. I don't check the door. I just lie there and stare at the ceiling until the dark feels normal again, and I don't watch the cemetery as much anymore. I think it's better not to know exactly when things change places. They only move when I'm not looking. My name is Caleb, and I'm from New Hope, Pennsylvania. I rent the little white house on the hill, the one people point at when they give directions and say, "You go past the cemetery, and it's right there on the left." That's my place. If you open my front curtains in the morning, first thing you see is a small Victorian-era cemetery right across the narrow road. It's nothing dramatic. Just a compact patch of land with an iron fence. Maybe 30 stones total, most of them leaning a bit. The front part is neat, grass cut, path of gravel looping through. But the back half is kind of a tangle-veins. Higher grass, some trees. There's this broken angel statue near the center missing its head. And off to the far right, there's one grave set apart from the others, like it got pushed out of the family photo. I didn't think much about any of that when I moved in. I'm a medical billing clerk for a small clinic over in Doylestown. I work from home most days, which sounds more exciting than it is. It's me, a laptop, insurance codes, and a big mug of coffee that I keep reheating and forgetting about. My cousin Aaron moved in with me about 6 months after I signed the lease. He'd gotten a job at a manufacturing plant outside town and needed a place fast. Split rent seemed easier than hunting for strangers on Craigslist. Aaron jokes a lot, more than he should sometimes. First night he walked out on the porch, looked across at the stones and said, "Well, at least the neighbors are quiet."
I remember.
The screen door creaked behind him when he stepped out. It does that every single time, this slow little whine before it closes. You can't really sneak in or out of this place. The house itself is older radiators that knock when they're heating up, but that settles at night with little pops. If you're not used to old houses, it can sound busy. New Hope is small, but it gets tourists in the summer and around Halloween. We get the usual ghost walk stuff downtown, old inns, stories about the canal, that kind of thing. People see the cemetery across from my house and ask if it's on the tour. It's not. It's too small, too ordinary, I guess. Most of the stones are from the late 1800s, a few early 1900s. Names worn light, dates covered in lichen. Someone from the borough comes by every couple of weeks and trims the front section. The back, like I said, is wild. Most evenings are quiet. I finish entering claims around 5, send off whatever needs sending, and then I'll step out on the front porch, lean against the rail, listen to dogs barking a few streets over. You can hear a distant train horn sometimes, especially on damp nights when the sound carries. Crows gather on the big maple between the house and the cemetery fence, shouting about whatever crows shout about. Chipmunks run along the stone wall that marks off my driveway, chattering until they suddenly stop like someone hit mute. I got comfortable with the view. Headless angel, crooked stones, that one grave off to the side under a scraggly tree. In the mornings, when the sun comes up behind the house and hits the cemetery first, the stones catch the light, and it almost looks warm over there. For the first few months I was here, it was just background, a landmark. It started with the gate. The iron fence around the cemetery has a single decorative gate at the front, right where the gravel path starts. It doesn't latch properly. If you push it shut, it hangs almost closed, but not quite. There's this little gap. You can still see it swing when the wind picks up. There's a particular clank it makes when it taps the post, a kind of soft metal knock. I heard it often enough that I stopped noticing. One Tuesday night in early October, I was heating up soup and waiting for Aaron to come back from second shift. The wind was picking up a bit, leaves scraping along the road. I heard the gate clank once, then again quicker. It sounded off, so I looked out the window over the sink. The porch light across the street at my neighbor's place flickered twice. And in that moment I saw the cemetery gate swinging all the way open, not just tapping. Open wide, like someone had walked through it. There was no one there. No car going by, no person on the road. Just the sound of leaves moving and the crunch of gravel somewhere down the street where a car turned the corner. I told myself it was the wind. Maybe a stronger gust came through, lined up just right. The next morning I noticed something else. I was on my way to the clinic for one of the rare days I had to be in person. I was locking the front door when something across the road caught my eye. That grave off to the side, the one under the scraggly tree, someone had put fresh flowers on it. Not plastic ones, real. White and yellow looked like daisies mixed with something else. The rest of the cemetery looked the same as always. A few faded arrangements on family plots near the front. But that isolated grave had a neat little bunch tucked right against the stone. I'd never seen anyone visit that grave. I'd seen the borough maintenance truck, sure. And once or twice a pair of older women walking through on a Sunday afternoon. But nobody ever went all the way back to that single stone at the edge. I remember thinking it was nice that someone still cared enough to bring flowers. When I got home that evening, the flowers were gone. Not wilted, not scattered, just gone. The ground around the grave wasn't disturbed. No petals, no stems, nothing. I figured maybe the wind took them, or some kid grabbed them on the way home from school. I mentioned it to Aaron that night. More as small talk than anything. Somebody finally decorated that loner grave, I said. Flowers were there this morning, gone by the time I got back. He was on the couch, shoes off, half watching some crime show. Maybe whoever put them there changed their mind, he said. Or maybe the dead guy's picky. That's dumb, I said, but we both laughed. A few nights later, the porch motion light went on by itself. That one stuck with me a little more. I'd replaced the bulb myself. It lines up with the front steps and part of the road, and it's pretty sensitive. Usually it flickers on when a car goes by or when Aaron comes home late and trudges up the walk, gravel crunching under his boots. But that Thursday, it clicked on when it was dead quiet outside. No cars, no people. just the sound of the wind pushing at the trees. I went to the front window and pulled the curtain aside. The light blasted the yard in that cold white glow. My eyes adjusted and I saw nothing. Front steps empty, road empty, cemetery across the way sitting dark. I waited, hand on the curtain, till the timer clicked the light back to black. "Turn the sensitivity down," Aaron said when I told him. "It's probably picking up raccoons or something." That made sense. We do get raccoons. I'd heard the trash cans rattle more than once. I got a little screwdriver and fussed with the settings. On the motion sensor the next day, it was all small stuff like that at first. The gate swinging wider than usual. Motion light coming on when I didn't see anything. Fresh flowers that appeared and disappeared on that one grave. Once early in the morning, I thought I heard someone say my name while I was buttering toast. Soft, kind of blended into the sound of the kettle. I turned around with the knife still in my hand, half expecting Aaron, but he was still in his room, door closed, alarm going off on his phone. I told myself it was the wind coming through the old windows. It really can sound like words sometimes, the way it squeezes past the frames and whistles down the hallway. You hear what you're already thinking about. Aaron was the one who started looking at the cemetery. More than I did. "You ever notice that grave?" he said one afternoon, pointing with his coffee mug through the living room window. "The one off to the side?" "Yeah, it's bugging me." "How?" "I don't know," he said, squinting. "It's just... everything else is lined up in rows. That one's shoved out like it did something wrong." "You're reading into nothing," I said. He shrugged. "You're the one talking about disappearing flowers." He bickered just enough to let it go. But after that, I noticed he'd glance toward it when we were out on the porch. It got to the point where I'd look away on purpose, just so I wasn't copying him. The first real moment that made me feel something colder was one Sunday afternoon when I decided to actually walk through the cemetery. I'd never done it properly. It felt weird living across from it for almost a year and never stepping inside. So I crossed when there weren't any cars, pushed the gate open, heard the iron hinges complain, and stepped onto the gravel path. The crunch under my shoes sounded a little too loud in the quiet. Up close, the front section is calmer. You can read most of the names. There's a family plot with 4 stones all in a row. Same surname, same style. A small lamb carved on one of the children's stones. I could smell damp earth and that faint, sharp scent of cut grass near the entrance where they'd trimmed recently. Further in, the path turns to the wilder back half. The grass gets higher and the stones go from old to worn down to nothing. The broken angel stands a little off the path. Arms out, head gone, moss creeping up the base. I walked all the way to that separated grave at the far right. The stone there is simpler. Shorter, too. The name was hard to read at first. Lichen covered most of the lower half. I wiped at it without thinking, then felt stupid, like I was erasing history with my sleeve. But the letters came through enough. Thomas C. Drake, 1879-1901. There was a small gap between the dates, the dash almost swallowed by the stones, where no beloved husband or son or anything like that, just the name and date. The grass around it was pressed down in a half circle, like someone had stood there recently. I figured that was from whenever the flowers had been placed. I remember hearing a crow caw right above me then, so loud I flinched. It hopped along a branch on the tree that shaded the grave and stared down. For a second, I felt watched, tactually watched, not just noticed. Then a car went by on the road, tires hissing on the pavement, and the feeling broke. The next week, things started repeating. Every time I checked, the gate was open wider than it had been the night before. I'd look out before bed habit and see it hanging wide. In the morning, it would be almost closed again, like someone had nudged it back, but not all the way. Sometimes I heard the screen door creak softly when no one was near it, like it was shifting in its frame. The radiator's knocking took on a pattern I kept thinking I recognized, then losing it. One night, I woke up because the house was too quiet. I don't know if that makes sense, but in an old place you get used to background noise. The hum of the fridge, the faint ticking of the living room clock, the whir of errands, fan down the hall, dogs barking 2 streets over. That night, nothing. Even the insects outside had gone silent. No cars. No wind. Then I heard footsteps in the gravel out front. Slow, deliberate crunch, pause, crunch. They stopped directly in front of the house. I laid there in the dark, holding my breath. I told myself it was someone walking their dog late, or a neighbor cutting through, or a drunk tourist wandering back from downtown. Normal things? Maybe they were just standing there checking their phone. The footsteps didn't move for what felt like a full minute. Then there was a single, softer crunch, like someone turning around. They went back the way they came, toward the cemetery gate. I heard that faint metal knock a few seconds later. In the morning, I checked for footprints out of pure habit. The gravel looked the same as always. The porch steps had a light dust of dirt, but they usually did. I had to go into the clinic that day, so I shook it off and told myself I'd been half-dash asleep. It was around then that Aaron started asking questions around town. He's more sociable than I am. He chats with the clerk at the corner store, the guy at the hardware place, the barista who makes his iced coffee on Saturdays. "What do you know about that graveyard?" he asked the woman at the checkout one evening when I was with him. I remember because she paused with her hand hovering over a pack of batteries he'd tossed on the counter. "Which one?" She said. "The little one up on the hill across from Caleb's place," he said, jerking his thumb toward me. "The one with the broken angel and that grave stuck way over to the side." The clerk's eyes flicked to me, then back to him. "Old church property," she said. "Used to be tied to the congregation that met where the antique shop is now. Long before my time, that grave off to the side," Aaron said. "Thomas Drake." She frowned a little. "Didn't know anyone still read the stones up there." Bring up the batteries. "Some of those plots aren't what you'd call regular." "How do you mean?" I asked. She shrugged, eyes on the register. "Different times, different rules. My granddad used to say that Hill was where they put people who didn't fit anywhere else." "Did something happen?" Aaron pressed. She slid the receipt toward him without answering that part. "You boys have a good night," she said. I told Aaron later he was being weird about it. He said, "If I'm going to get up in the middle of the night to pee and stare straight at a family of corpses, I'd kind of like to know their deal." "Just close the blinds," I said. "I do," he said. "They don't feel closed." Around mid-October, the disturbances stopped being just out there and started feeling in here. I don't know exactly when that line got crossed, but there were a few things in a row that pushed me over. The muddy footprints were first. It rained hard one Friday. Steady all day with that smell of wet asphalt and damp leaves. I worked from the kitchen table because the window there gives me decent light. By evening, the rain had let up, but everything outside was soaked. I could hear the drip from the eaves and the squish of cars going slower than usual on the road. Aaron texted he was grabbing a drink with coworkers, so I was alone. I microwaved leftovers, watched some dumb video, then turned in early. I remember double-checking the front door. I always do lock, deadbolt, the chain at the top. I'm not paranoid, just routine-oriented. When you spend all day double-checking numbers, you start double-checking everything. I woke up sometime after midnight because I was cold. Not freezing, but the kind of cold where the hairs on your arms stand up. The room felt wrong. I could hear the radiator ticking, but not really giving off much heat. I got up to grab an extra blanket from the hall closet. That's when I saw them, on the hallway floor. Starting just inside the front door and leading toward the living room, there were faint footprints. Not big, heavy boot prints, more like bare or stocking feet. You could see the darker impressions where the wet had soaked into the wood, then faded as they went. 5, maybe 6 steps total. The last one disappeared near the threshold to the living room. I just stood there. The fridge hummed in the kitchen. Somewhere outside, a dog barked once and then stopped. I reached out and touched one of the prints with my finger. It was damp and cold. When I pulled my hand back, you could see the smear where I'd disturbed it. My first thought was Aaron. Maybe he'd come home, gone back out, something like that. The front door was still locked, chain in place. His bedroom door was open. Lights off. Bed empty. His work boots were still by the door, mud dried on them from a few days before. I checked every room. Closet, bathroom, even behind the shower curtain, even though I knew how stupid that was. No one was there. The windows were shut. A screen door on the back still latched. I ended up wiping the footprints with a towel and tossing it into the hamper. The whole time I kept telling myself there had to be some explanation. Maybe the roof had leaked and the water had dripped down in that pattern. Maybe I'd spilled something earlier and forgotten. Maybe Aaron had come home and left again before I woke up. I somehow hadn't heard the door. When he rolled in around 3, clumsy and tired, he swore he hadn't come home earlier. He looked at me like I was messing with him when I tried to explain. "Maybe you were sleepwalking," he said. "You ever done that?" "Not that I know of," I said. "Then how would you know?" He said, and that shut me up. After that, I started noticing objects out of place. Little things. My keys on the wrong hook. A mug I always keep by the sink suddenly sitting on the living room coffee table. Once the curtain in my bedroom was drawn, when I was sure I'd left it half open. It all sounds like nothing when I say it out loud. People misplace things. They forget what they did. But it never felt like I'd just forgotten. It felt corrected, adjusted, as if someone had their own idea of where things should go. The worst part, me, was the voice. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon. Aaron was at work. I was on a call with an insurance rep, on hold. The kind of hold that seems like it will last forever. The TV was off. The house was quiet, except for a delivery truck, idling briefly outside before driving on, and the faint hush of cars in the distance. I heard Aaron say my name from the back of the house. Clear as anything. "Caleb." I muted my headset and turned in my chair. "Yeah," I called back. "Nothing." "Did you forget something?" I said, getting up. I walked down the hallway, footsteps soft on the wood. His door was open, room empty. Both our coats hung by the back door. No extra shoes missing. Back door still locked. I stood there, hand on the doorknob, listening. The insects outside had gone quiet again. No birds, no dogs, just the faint vibration of my own fridge. My skin prickled. The insurance rep came back on the line in the other room and said, "Sorry about your wait," and I almost jumped out of my skin. That night, when I told Aaron, he laughed at first, then stopped when he saw I wasn't laughing with him. "Hey," he said, quieter. "You okay?" "You've been kind of jumpy? I keep hearing things," I said. Seeing things moved. The footprints. He looked toward the front window, where the cemetery was just a dark suggestion. "Maybe you need a night away from Corpse Corner," he said. "We could crash at Mike's place. He's got that pull-out sofa." "I'm fine," I said, too fast. "It's just an old house." He didn't push it. A few days later, I went to the borough office on my lunch break. I told myself it was to ask about property taxes and trash pickup, but really, I wanted to ask about the cemetery. The building smells like old paper and coffee that's been sitting on the hot plate too long. The clerk behind the counter was a guy in his 50s with glasses and a small, neat beard. "I was wondering if you had any records on that little cemetery up on Hill Street," I said. "Across from my house," he squinted, then turned to a metal filing cabinet. "Hill Street. That's the Drake lot, right?" "The what?" I asked. "Drake," he said, pulling a drawer open. "Family name? It's not an official municipal cemetery. It's a holdover. Private church use, then family. Some of the land is technically still tied to the older property lines." "Older property lines?" He found a thin folder and opened it on the counter. There was a hand-drawn map inside, photocopied about 100 times. He pointed with a pen. "See, that house you're in used to be part of the same parcel as the burial ground. They split it when they built the road, but the paperwork's messy. Happens with stuff from the Victorian era. Lots of here be dragons scribbled in the margins. I saw a list of names on one page, handwritten. Most of them matched the Stones I'd seen families, couples, a few kids. At the bottom was Thomas C. DRAKE special notation, C Minister's book. "What special notation?" I asked. He closed the folder halfway. "Old church business," he said. "Before zoning, before oversight." Folks did things their own way. Did what things? He pushed the folder back into the cabinet. Look, if you're having a boundary dispute about mowing or anything, we can send someone out. But if you're just curious, he shrugged. Some of those graves aren't what you think they are. How can a grave not be what you think it is? I asked. He gave me this tight little smile. Sometimes they're not about where you put a body, he said. Sometimes it's about where you put a person on paper, where you keep them, officially. Heirs, debts, responsibilities, you know? I didn't know. But he'd already moved on, asking the man behind me if he needed permit forms. That night I couldn't stop looking at that separate grave. Sunset threw long shadows across the stones. The porch light flickered once before it came fully on, humming softly. I leaned on the railing, listening to the leaves scrape along the road. You're gonna wear a hole in the air if you keep staring, Aaron said behind me. Apparently this used to be one property, I said. House and cemetery. Same family. Creepy, he said in that joking tone that wasn't fully joking. Think they got a family discount? The clerk said some of the graves aren't about bodies, I said. They're about putting a person somewhere on paper. Keeping track, Aaron shifted beside me. I could hear the wood creak under his weight. You mean like a record? I guess, I said. We fell quiet. The insects sputtered and then went still. Somewhere far off, a church bell chimed the hour. The cemetery stayed dark. A week later, I was going through a box of old documents the landlord had left in the basement. He'd told me I could toss them if I wanted, but I'd never gotten around to it. Old appliance warranties, past utility bills, a couple of oil delivery receipts from the 90s. At the bottom was a thinner folder with Hill ST occupancy written on it. I don't know why I opened it. What? Curiosity? Probably. Inside were typed sheets listing tenants, names, move-in dates, move-out dates. It went back decades. A lot of short stays. A few notes in the margin here and there. Left no forwarding address. Deceased estate handled by brother. On the last page, my name was there. Caleb Morgan Lee Start, and then the date I'd moved in. There was a line for end, still blank. Next to my name, in pencil, someone had written Drake Lot C, cross-reference. My stomach did a little flip. I flipped the page over, half expecting more, but it was blank. I found no cross-reference in the box. Later that night, I walked out to the porch again. The air was cold enough that I could see my breath. The porch light flickered, then held steady. Across the road, the cemetery was just shapes in the dark stones like teeth. The broken angel's outline, the darker mass of the tree over that separated grave. The gate was open, not just a little, all the way. I hadn't heard it move. I don't remember deciding to go out there. One minute I was on the porch, the next my shoes were crunching the gravel on the road. The wind pushed at my jacket. The iron gate was cold under my hand when I grabbed it. It swayed once, like something had just slipped through moments before. I walked along the path, past the neater front rows, into the tangled back half where the grass clutched at my ankles. I could hear the leaves scraping against the fence, a soft, constant sound. The insects were silent again. I stopped in front of Thomas Drake's grave. Someone had placed fresh flowers there. White and yellow, like before. There was no plastic wrapper, no ribbon, just stems pushed lightly into the soil. I hadn't seen anyone come by all day. I'd been home. The road had been quiet. The stone looked clearer, not newer exactly, but more readable than the last time I'd stood there. The name was sharp in the dim light from the street lamp. The date stood out. 1-879-1901. Underneath, carved shallow, was something I hadn't noticed before. Maybe it had been covered by lichen. Maybe I hadn't looked closely enough. 3 words. Account still open. My throat went dry. That wasn't a normal epitaph. It sounded like something you'd see on a ledger, not a grave. Behind me, gravel crunched very softly, like someone had taken a single step and then stopped. I didn't turn around. The wind moved through the tree, loosening a few leaves that drifted down and landed near my shoes. In the distance, a train horn sounded, long and low. "I don't know what you're doing," I said quietly, not even sure who I was talking to. But I live across the street, I pay my rent, I'm on time with everything. My breath fogged in front of me. My fingers felt numb on the cold air. There was no reply, of course. Just the sound of the leaves, the faint hum of the street lamp, and my own heart thumping way too loud in my ears. After a while, I turned and walked back along the path. The gravel crunched under my shoes. I didn't hear any other footsteps. When I closed the gate, it didn't swing back open again. It stayed shut, resting against the post. I slept on the couch that night with the TV on low. Aaron came in late, glanced at me, and didn't say much. In the morning, the footprints were back in the hallway, faint but there. They started at the front door and faded toward the living room. This time, there was a tiny smear of dirt on the wall about knee height, like something or someone had brushed against it. I wiped them up without calling Aaron. I didn't tell him about the inscription or the occupancy folder. I stopped asking at the borough office. I learned which creaks in the house meant nothing, and which ones meant the front door had shifted in its frame again. I bought flowers once, just cheap ones from the grocery store, and I stood there in the aisle for a long time before I put them back. I still work at the same kitchen table, listen to the same radiators knock, hear the same dogs barking far away, and the train horn at night. Sometimes the porch light flickers on when nothing's moving outside. Sometimes the gate is wide open in the morning. Sometimes when I'm sure I left my keys on one hook, I find them on the other. I don't go through the old documents anymore. I don't ask about who lived here before me or how their leases ended. I haven't checked to see if anything new has been carved into that stone. I don't really need to. From my front window, I can see that separated grave under the tree. No matter what time of year it is, no matter how much the wind kicks up or how heavy the rain gets, the grass around it looks just a little flatter than the rest, like someone's been standing there. The flowers on that grave are always fresh. My name is Laura, and I'm from Stillwater, Minnesota. I always feel like I need to start with that, because people hear this and think it sounds like something out of a movie, and it really isn't. It's just my life, I guess. Regular, boring, until it wasn't. I moved back to Stillwater about 3 years ago after a breakup in Minneapolis. I work as a data analyst for an insurance company, mostly from home. So it didn't really matter where I lived as long as the Wi-Fi held up. Rents were cheaper here, and I missed the river, the way the town gets quiet in the evenings once the tourists are gone. It felt like hitting reset on everything. I ended up renting this small 2-bedroom house on a little hill. It's nothing fancy white siding, sagging porch, those old storm windows you have to fight with every spring. The one weird thing about it, at least 2 other people, is what's across the street. Instead of another house or a park or even a parking lot, there's this tiny old cemetery. When I say tiny, I mean it. It's basically a pocket-sized rectangle of land, maybe half a block wide, the low brick wall around it that's chipped in spots. There's a narrow iron gate at the front and a little gravel path that splits the graves into 2 uneven sides. You can tell it's from the Victorian era. Lots of tall, narrow headstones, rounded tops, angels and hands carved into the stone. The dates go back to the late 1800s for the most part. A lot of them are so worn down, you have to stand there squinting and tracing the letters with your fingers to read them. It's actually not creepy in the daytime. The city keeps the part near the front neat, grass cut. A few flowers sometimes, the path raked. But maybe halfway back it gets more tangled. The grass is longer there, with patches of moss, and a couple of stones have sunk at weird angles. There's this broken angel statue with no head near the back corner, tilted against a stone, and one grave that's set a little apart from the others. Almost like whoever picked that spot didn't want to be with the rest. I live with someone, by the way. It's not just me. When I signed the lease, the place was too much for my budget alone, so I posted about it at work. A coworker who needed a place responded. Her name's Megan. We weren't close before, just, "Hey, how's your weekend?" Kind of coworkers, but she'd just broken up with her boyfriend and needed out of her lease. So we ended up housemates. Megan's the sort of person who laughs off everything. First time she came over to look at the house, she stepped out of her car, stared at the cemetery, and went, "Oh my God. You didn't tell me we were moving in across from a live-action Halloween decoration. And she grinned and said, "Whatever. Bet it's quiet at night? No loud neighbors?" We signed stuff a week later. Day-to-day life was pretty normal at first. I'd wake up around 7, make coffee, listen to the radiator knocking in the winter or the old wood settling when it warmed up outside. I'd log into my laptop at the kitchen table, and Megan would stumble out around 9, half asleep, hunting for coffee. She works downtown at a dentist's office. So she'd leave around 10, shoes crunching on the gravel driveway. Car engine fading down the hill. If I got stuck on something at work, I'd wander out to the porch and just look at the cemetery. You start to recognize the layout after a while. The tall obelisk near the front, the lambs carved on the smaller stones for kids, the corner where the brick wall has a crack big enough for a chipmunk to squeeze through. In the afternoons, you can hear the crows over there. And sometimes you'll see a couple of older folks walking through slowly, like they're looking for a specific name. It all just blended into the background. The sound of gravel under shoes, the distant train horned down by the river, a dog barking a few houses away, the screen door creaking when Megan came home. In summer, we'd sit on the porch with the cheap string lights we hung up, watching the sky go pink over the stones. It felt peaceful. I don't know how else to say it, so nothing was strange at first. I want to be clear about that. The first thing that threw me off was small enough that I didn't mention it to Megan. One afternoon in late September, it was windy, the kind of wind that moves in sharp bursts, not a steady breeze. I was on a break, standing at the window with my mug, looking at the cemetery. The gate was closed, like always. It has this habit of squeaking whenever anyone goes in or out. I turned away to answer a message, and I heard the squeak. You get used to it, like you get used to the muffled church bells from downtown. I figured someone was visiting. When I glanced back out, though, the gate was wide open. No one walking up the street. No car that had just left. The wind was blowing, sure, but it wasn't that strong. I remember thinking, okay, someone's in there, you just can't see them. Maybe behind a stone? Maybe they parked around the corner. Totally normal. I went back to work and forgot about it until I heard the gate squeak again. When I looked out that time, the gate was shut. Again, not a big deal. The wind can move things. Metal expands and shrinks. I work with numbers all day. My brain likes explanations. I told myself it was just one of those old things that swing a little on their hinges when the gust hits right. A few days later, I noticed fresh flowers on one of the older graves. It stood out to me because most of them only get plastic ones, or nothing at all. These were real white and yellow and purple, like something from the grocery store bouquet section. I could see them clearly from our porch, sitting in a small glass jar on a stone that had a date from 1892. The name was worn, but I could make out Ella and maybe Johnson if I angled my head. Someone's got a secret ancestor. I joked when Megan came home that day. She squinted across the street. Which one? That one third row back, near the broken angel. She stared a second, then shrugged. Honestly? Good for Ella. She's doing better than my grandma. My family hasn't visited her in like 5 years. We laughed and went inside. But that night, lying in bed with the window cracked open, I heard the faint clink of glass from outside. Not loud, just a tiny sound, like something lightly tapping stone. I sat up a little, listening. The cicadas, which you usually hear nonstop by September, had gone quiet. No dogs barking. No cars, and then nothing else. I told myself it was probably just the wind knocking a branch against the jar. I fell back asleep. Things like that kept happening. Little stuff. The motion light on our porch would flick on around 2 or 3 in the morning. Even when there was no car, no raccoon, no visible reason. I checked for spiders on the sensor, cobwebs, anything that could set it off. Sometimes I'd wake up, see that harsh white light under my curtains, and just lie there staring at the ceiling, listening. My motion light has trust issues, I told Megan one morning. She smirked over her cereal. It's just the neighbors coming to say hi. You're not helping, I said. I mean, she said with a mouthful of cereal. If I was dead and stuck across the street from you, I'd probably come visit too. You've got better snacks. That's the kind of joke she made. It kept things light. The first time I heard what I thought was a voice, I was on the porch alone. It was early evening, a little chilly, that time of year when you can smell wood smoke somewhere in the neighborhood. The sun was low, turning the tops of the stones a dull orange. I had a blanket over my legs and my laptop open, pretending to watch a training video for work. I heard my name, just once, soft, like someone calling from a room away. Laura. I actually thought Megan had come home and was standing inside the doorway behind me. I turned my head and said, "Yeah." Without thinking, there was no one there. The door behind me was shut. I could see through the small window in a empty hallway. Couch, the lamp by the TV, turned off. I frowned, pulled the blanket tighter, and listened. Nothing, just leaves scraping across the pavement. The faint hum of a car farther down the hill. A crow calling from somewhere behind the cemetery. I told myself it was the wind doing that thing where it catches in the trees and tricks your brain for half a second. People hear their name in white noise all the time. There are studies about it. I actually Googled that later. I didn't tell Megan about that one either. It was the neighbor who first hinted that something was off. Even then, she didn't exactly say it. Her name's Mrs. Keller. She lives in the small brick house next to ours, with a perfect little front yard and a ceramic goose by the steps that she dresses up for holidays. One Saturday morning, I was out raking leaves from our yard, most of them blown over from the cemetery. Actually, when she came over to the fence with a paper bag full of something. "I made pumpkin bread," she said. "Too much for just me." We chatted a bit like neighbors do. Weather, how long I'd been back in town, how Megan liked her job. At some point, I said I kind of like being across from the cemetery. It's quiet, and there's something, I don't know, respectful about it, I guess. Mrs. Keller's smile faded just a touch. Not a lot. Just like someone turned down the brightness a notch. "It's old," she said. "Older than most people realize. This street wasn't here when they started it." Oh, I said. "So the cemetery was first?" She nodded. "They say the original boundary went farther up the hill. Land gets bought, lines get moved, records get confused." She said that last word carefully. I laughed a little to keep it light. "So what, our house used to be part of it?" She looked past me then, up at our porch, at the front windows. Her jaw tightened. For a second, I thought she was going to say something important. She didn't. She just shook her head. "Some things are better left where they were," she said. "Anyway, the bread's still warm. Should have a slice before your friend eats it all." She turned and walked back to her house. The leaves under her shoes made this dry, crackling sound. A crow started cawing again from somewhere over. The stones loud and sudden, and I jumped more than I should have. After that, I kept thinking about what she'd said. Boundaries, records, confused. It's the kind of thing that sticks in the back of your mind and quietly hooks into other thoughts later. The incidents didn't stay small forever, but they stayed. Quiet. That's the best word I have. One night I woke up to hear footsteps on the gravel outside. Not running, just slow, steady, crunching, like someone walking past the house. I checked my phone to 17 a.m. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. They stopped right about where our porch is. I waited for the sound of the screen door, or the motion light, or someone knocking. Nothing. I slid out of bed and went to my window. The motion light was on this time, flooding the front yard with that cold white glow. I didn't see anyone. The street was empty. The cemetery gate was closed. The trees were still. I told myself it was someone cutting through, taking a shortcut, or maybe a delivery running late and turning around. I went back to bed. It took a while to fall asleep. A week later, Megan came home from a late shift and dropped her bag by the door with a sigh. "You heard anything weird lately?" she asked. I felt a little jolt in my chest. "Weird how?" She flopped onto the couch. "I don't know, like footsteps. Or someone talking outside. I swear, when I got out of my car just now, it sounded like somebody said something from across the street, but there was nobody there. It's probably just echoes. Sound bounces funny here." "Yeah," I said. "I've thought I heard things too." She looked at me over the back of the couch. "You serious?" "Just once or twice," I said quickly. "Probably nothing. Wind and all that." She smiled, but it wasn't her usual big grin. Man, if this place is haunted, I'm charging extra rent. We dropped the subject. Neither of us said the word cemetery that time. A few days after that, I got curious about the grave with the flowers. Ella Johnson. I had the afternoon off, so I walked across the street, pushing the iron gate open. It squeaked, like always. The gravel under my sneakers sounded louder when I was actually inside, like it had more weight to it. The air felt cooler in there, even though it was sunny. I could smell damp earth and something metallic like old coins. The cicadas that had been buzzing near our yard became this dull background hum. I found the stone easily, third row back, near the broken angel. The flowers were different now, but still fresh or new small bunch in a glass jar. Blue this time. The stone itself was worn, but I could make out the letters more clearly up close. Ella M. Johnston, 1871 to 1892. Johnston, not Johnson. I'd been reading it wrong from the porch. My eyes do that with distant text. They fill in what they expect. I stood there a minute, reading the name again and again. Ella M. Johnston. Died at 21. No beloved wife or daughter of carved under it. Just the name and dates and a little carved hand pointing upward. On impulse, I took out my phone and opened the county records website. I don't know why. I guess I thought maybe there'd be some digital record of who was buried where. Some neat little map. There wasn't. I found a PDF of old cemetery plots scanned decades ago. The image resolution was terrible. I zoomed in and out, but the lot numbers were blurry and the names fuzzy. Funny thing though, I could see where our street was now, and where the old boundary lines used to be. It really did look like the cemetery had once extended farther uphill, right into where our house sits. On the way out, I passed a stone near the front I'd never really paid attention to before. It was taller than the others, with a family name on it. Johnston, in big letters. It had several names listed underneath, all with different years. One of them jumped out at me. Laura M. Johnston, 1903-1931. My stomach did this weird dropping thing. I stared at it for a long time, until my eyes watered and the letters started to blur. It was my first name, my middle initial. Not an exact match, obviously. Johnston, not my last name. Different years. But still, it's a common name, I muttered to myself. You're being weird. On my way back out, the gate didn't squeak. I noticed that later, lying in bed. After that day, the house felt different. Not dramatically, just off, in small ways that are hard to explain. I'd put my keys on the hook by the door and find them on the kitchen table later. I'd swear I left my bedroom door half open and come back to find it shut, or open wider. Once I found muddy smears on the inside of the back door, down near the floor, like someone with damp shoes had nudged it open. I might have tracked that in myself. I kept telling myself that, but there were the footprints. It had rained one night, steady and hard. The next morning, the yard was soft and soggy. I went out the back door to take the trash to the alley. That's when I saw them. Footprints on the small concrete pad just outside the back door, half-dried patches of mud in the shape of bare feet, not shoes. The prints were smallish, maybe my size or a little smaller. They led up to the door, not away from it. I froze, trash bag hanging from my hand. My first thought was, Megan? But Megan wears slippers around the house and sneakers outside. I'd never seen her walk barefoot in the backyard. These prints weren't there at midnight when I'd taken the recycling out. I'm sure of that. I looked around. The yard was empty. Mrs. Keller's curtains were half open. Could hear a woodpecker somewhere, tapping on a pole. The air had that damp, chill smell after rain. I ended up hosing the prints off, telling myself I had to, or they'd stain. I didn't say anything to Megan that day. I didn't want one of her jokes about ghost feet rattling around my head. At some point, I went down a rabbit hole with old records. I asked the clerk at City Hall if they had any detailed maps of the cemetery, just out of curiosity. She was a middle-aged woman with glasses on a chain and a slow way of speaking. Those old plots? She said, "We've got some stuff in the back." The records are a mess, though. Things weren't always filed the way they should have been. She disappeared into a back room and came out with a rolled-up map and a folder of photocopies. I sat at a table, under fluorescent lights, listening to the faint buzzing of the fixtures and the occasional ring of a phone. The map showed what Mrs. Keller had hinted at. The earlier boundary line cut up the hill farther. There were notes in the margin about reclaimed land, adjacent lots sold, stones moved, things like that. One of the photocopied pages mentioned the Johnston family lot being partially relocated. In the 1930s, when the street was expanded. Partially, I asked when the clerk walked by again. She shrugged. Some things got moved. Some didn't. There were money issues, ownership disputes. That was almost 100 years ago, and nobody kept perfect track. So, what happens if they weren't all moved? I said. I mean, if some graves are still technically under houses. She gave me this look like she really didn't want to think about that. Then she tapped the folder with her finger. Not every burial is about where the stone ends up, she said. Sometimes it's just about the paperwork. You need anything else? I said no and went home. My head felt too full. Around that time, the voices, or what I thought were voices, got clearer. Not loud, not dramatic, just clearer. One night, I was in the kitchen making tea. The house was quiet. Megan was in her room with her door mostly closed, a faint sound of some podcast drifting out. The porch light was on, shining through the small pane in the door. I heard it again. My name. From the front hallway this time, Laura. It sounded like someone standing just inside the door, calling softly. Not Megan's voice, not exactly mine. That's something in between, like hearing yourself on a recording after it's been processed somehow. I turned off the kettle and listened. My heart was beating fast, but everything else in the house felt normal. The fridge humming, the faint tick of the wall clock, a car passing by down on the main road, a distant whoosh. Did you say something? I called toward Megan's room. No, she called back. Did you? I swallowed. No, we didn't talk about it. Another time, I was working late at the kitchen table. It was after midnight. The house had that deep, settled quiet like it was sleeping. The radiator made a small knocking sound every few minutes. Outside, I heard the faint scrape of leaves on the pavement, and every so often, a passing car far away. I got up to use the bathroom. I came back. My chair had been pulled slightly away from the table. Not much, just a few inches, enough that I noticed. I stared at it for a second. Then I looked at the back door. The lock was still latched. The front door was deadbolted. Megan's door was shut. I could see the line of light under it. I pushed the chair back in and sat down. I told myself I must have left it that way. People misremember all kinds of little things. There are studies on that too. I kept repeating that in my head. Megan started making more comments around then. You ever feel like the house shifts? She asked once while we were brushing. Our teeth at the same time, foam in both our mouths, talking around it. Like settling, I said. Yeah, but like, more organized, she said. Like I put my hoodie on the couch and it's on the chair later. Or my keys are on the table instead of the hook, and I don't remember moving them. I spat into the sink. You sure that's not just you? She snorted. Maybe, probably, it's just, I swear I hear the back door sometimes. Like it opens and closes, really soft, but it's always locked when I check. We're just jumpy because of the cemetery, I said. It gets in your head. Yeah, she said, shrugging. Probably, but she stopped joking about it after that. The crossing point, if I had to put a pin in it, was a Sunday night in late October. It was one of those evenings when the air feels thin and cold and you can smell winter coming. The porch light was on, shining over the yard and hitting the front row of stones across the street, making the shadows behind them darker. Megan was away that weekend, visiting her sister. I had the house to myself. I'd watched some dumb show and turned it off around 11. I locked the doors, checked the windows, did the whole routine. Then I went to bed. I woke up in the dark with that feeling you get sometimes, like someone said your name in a dream and it pulled you up out of it. The room was quiet. The clock said 3:08 a.m. The motion light wasn't shining through the curtains. Everything felt heavy and still. And then I heard it. The soft sound of the back door latch clicking. Not loud, just a tiny mechanical sound, like someone easing it open slowly so it wouldn't slam. My whole body went tense. I lay there listening. The house was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. The radiator didn't knock. No cars passed. No dogs barked. Then, from the hallway outside my bedroom, I heard footsteps. Bare feet on the old wood floor. Slow. One step. A pause. Another step. Coming from the direction of the kitchen. I told myself, you're half asleep. Houses creak. Old floorboards expand. This is just that. This is nothing else. The footsteps stopped outside my door. The hallway. Light was off, but there was a faint line of something under the door. Not light. Just a difference in shadow, like someone standing on the other side, blocking whatever dimness was there. I didn't say anything. I didn't move. I just stared at that line under the door, not breathing. After a long time, minutes, maybe the shadow shifted. The sense of someone standing there sort of thinned out. The hallway floor made one soft, receding sound, like weight leaving it. Then nothing. I don't know how long I waited before I got up. When I finally did, my legs felt shaky. I opened my door. The hallway was empty. The kitchen light was off. The back door was shut, deadbolt turned, chain lock in place. There were faint damp marks on the floor, though, not full footprints. Just irregular, darker patches in the wood grain, like something wet had touched it and was drying. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat on the couch with a blanket around me, the TV on low, flicking through channels without watching. Every little sound made me jump. The next day I told Megan about it over the phone, left out some parts, made it sound less direct. It was probably a dream, she said. It's like sleep paralysis or something. Yeah, I said, yeah, probably. But when she came home that evening, she double-checked both doors herself. A few days later, I was going through the kitchen drawer, where we keep all the random papers menus, takeout magnets, the lease copy, that kind of thing. I was looking for a warranty for the microwave. Instead, I found the original property info sheet the realtor had given me when I first looked at the house. I'd forgotten it was in there. I flipped it open without really thinking. The basic stuff: square footage, utilities, zoning printed in this ugly gray font. At the bottom, there was a note I swear I hadn't noticed before. Original lot designation, Johnston family parcel, partial. I just stared at the word Johnston for a long time. My thumb left a little smear on the edge of the paper. Somewhere outside, a crow cawed 3 times and then went silent. Later that week, I ran into Mrs. Keller again while bringing in groceries. She glanced at the bags, then at my front door. "You settling in okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Mostly, I was looking at some of the old records about the cemetery and about this house." Her expression tightened. "Those records just make people nervous," she said. "Most of them aren't accurate anymore anyway." "There was a note about the Johnston parcel," I said. "And I saw their stones across the street. One of them had my name, full name. It's not exactly the same, but it's close." She looked at me for a long second, longer than was comfortable. Then she let out a slow breath. "Those graves aren't what you think they are," she said quietly. "What does that mean?" I asked. She just shook her head, like she regretted saying it, and turned back toward her house. "Some things get moved on paper," she said over her shoulder. "Some don't. It's not always about where the stone is." That night, I lay in bed and listened to the wind move through the bare branches over the cemetery. The leaves were mostly gone by then, so the sound was more of a thin rattling than a rustle. The motion light clicked on once, throwing light across the ceiling. Then off again. I heard my name one last time a few nights after that. I was half asleep, drifting when it came. Not from the hallway, not from outside, from right next to the bed. Like someone leaning down to wake you, Laura. It wasn't my voice this time. It wasn't Megan's. It was neutral, calm, not threatening, just familiar in a way I can't explain. I opened my eyes. The room was dark, shapes of furniture faint against the window. No one there. The house was quiet. My heart was pounding, but the rest of me felt strangely calm. I didn't get up. I didn't turn on the light. Just lay there, staring by habit at the corner where the door was, listening to the silence. Eventually, I fell asleep. I still live here. We talked about moving once, Megan and I, but then rent went up everywhere and life got busy, and the idea faded. The cemetery is still across the street. The gate still squeaks. Sometimes there are fresh flowers on Ella M. Johnston's grave. Sometimes there aren't. I don't go looking at the stones as much anymore. Try not to read the names when I walk past. I don't check the floor for footprints when it rains. If something moves in the house, a chair, a set of keys, a door just slightly more open than I remember, I put it back and don't say anything. I don't hear my name at night now. Not clearly, anyway. Once in a while, I think I catch a sound in the hallway, a soft shift of weight, but I roll over and let it pass. I still keep the old property sheet in the drawer. Sometimes I feel like taking it out and reading that line about the parcel again. Sometimes I feel like going back to City Hall and asking better questions, or pressing Mrs. Keller when she trails off. But I don't. The porch light still comes on by itself some nights, even when nothing moves outside. When it does, it shines. Straight out across the street, over the low brick wall and the rows of stones. And into that darker back half where the grass grows longer and the angel statue leans without a head. And when I see it glowing like that through the curtains, I just lie still and let it burn, and I stopped asking whose name that is. My name is Daniel, and I'm from Hudson, New York. I always feel like I have to start with that, because otherwise, people picture some backwoods little town with one stoplight and a bar. Hudson isn't like that. It's old, sure, and small compared to a city. But it's got galleries and coffee shops and tourists who drive in on weekends to walk around and buy candles that cost way too much. I work at the little historical society off Warren Street, in the old brick building that used to be a bank. I'm an archivist, which sounds fancier than it is. Mostly I sit in a windowless room, cataloging boxes of papers and photos that smell like dust and vinegar. I rent the top floor of a narrow, creaky house on a side street a few blocks away. It's divided into 3 apartments. I've got the attic one-angled ceilings, weird little closets, windows that rattle when trucks go by. My younger sister Emily moved in with me last year after her breakup. Technically, she's on the pull-out in the living room, but she's made it look like her own space. Plants, string lights, the usual. We grew up sharing a room, so it didn't feel like a big deal at first. The house sits right across from a small Victorian-era cemetery. Pocket-sized is what the realtor called it. That stuck with me. It's not the big town cemetery on the hill. It's more like a leftover piece of history someone forgot to move. Iron fence, decorative gate that squeaks, maybe 4 short rows of old stones. The ones close to the street are upright and cleaned up, and there's a gravel path that runs down the middle. But if you look toward the back, past the first couple rows, the grass gets taller and wild. Moss on the stones. Ground a little uneven. Near the center, there's this broken angel statue, just the lower half of it still standing on a pedestal. Somebody knocked the top off years ago. And then there's one grave set off in the far left corner, not with the others. It's separated by a little gap of bare dirt, where nothing seems to grow right. There's also a metal bench that faces that single grave, like it's waiting for someone who doesn't come anymore. When I first moved in, I kind of liked the view. It was quiet. No kids screaming in a backyard, no neighbor's TV through the wall. Just trees, stones, and the occasional dog walker who cut through, even though there's technically a sign that says not to. At night, the streetlight throws this pale, steady circle over the front row of markers, and the rest mostly disappears into shadow. It didn't bother me. I'd make tea, sit by the window with my laptop, and it was just there, part of the backdrop. My schedule is pretty routine. I'm at the Historical Society 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. I walk there in 10 minutes. On the way home, I usually cut past the cemetery just out of habit. There's a gate in front of our house and another at the far end, and people use it as a kind of shortcut between streets. You learn where the gravel crunches loudest when it's dry, and where it sinks soft when it's rained. In summer, you can smell the warm dirt and cut grass, mixed with car exhaust from the main road. In fall, it's leaves and cold air. Emily works evenings at a restaurant down by the river. She gets home around 11 most nights, sometimes later on weekends. We joke that we're like a tag team. She gets the apartment during the loud, bright hours when I'm gone, and I get it during the quiet ones. We usually overlap for an hour or 2 at night, It's just enough to watch something dumb together and argue over the volume. The cemetery was just something we joked about. She'd say you really had to pick the place across from the dead, and I'd tell her it probably kept the rent lower. On windy nights, you could hear the trees there sway and scrape against each other. Sometimes a branch would tap against one of the taller stones, a hollow little clink. You get used to it. You tell yourself you're used to it anyway. For the first few months, nothing weird happened at all. I noticed that because I'd expected to notice something, and I didn't. No strange lights, no sounds that couldn't be explained. Occasionally, the porch light would flicker, but the landlord said the fixture was old, and he'd get to it eventually. The radiators knocked in winter. The wood in the hallway settled. You'd hear someone's TV through the floor. Normal stuff. The first thing I remember thinking was odd was the cemetery gate. Not the one at the far end ours. The decorative iron one. It's heavy and doesn't swing easily. You have to kind of lift and push at the same time. It also has a latch that, if you drop it all the way down, doesn't just pop open with wind. You hear it when someone comes through. Metal on metal, sharp and clear. One morning in early October, stepped outside to head to work and saw the gate standing wide open. The air was cold enough that I could see my breath. There were leaves piled against the bottoms of the stones, and the grass was wet. I could hear a truck down the block and some crows arguing in a tree. The gate looked wrong, that's all. It had rained the night before. The ground around it was muddy, but there were no fresh footprints on the path. Just the older pressed down ones. I didn't think paranormal or anything. I just figured someone closed it badly, or a kid came through, or the maintenance guy forgot to latch it. I shut it on my way past and dropped the latch all the way. It made that clanging sound I'd heard 100 times. 2 days later, same thing. I came down the front steps, coffee in one hand, messenger bag over my shoulder, and the gate was open again. The air was calmer that day. No big wind, just a light chill. A dog barked a few streets over. I set my coffee on the fence post, walked over and checked the latch. It wasn't broken. You had to lift it to raise it. It wasn't rusted through. The hinges creaked, but held. That night I mentioned it to Emily while she was lacing up her work shoes. "Maybe there's a ghost with poor gate etiquette," she said. "It's not funny," I said, even though I sort of smiled. "Someone's leaving it open. Kids? Maybe so?" She shrugged. "Let the dead get some air," as she went off to work. I stayed home that night, reading through a stack of fragile letters we'd just gotten donated. Wind rattled the windows a little. Around 9, the building's hallway light clicked off. The timer setting is weird, and I got up to flip the switch back on. When I passed the front window, I glanced down out of habit. The gate was open again. I stood there for a second, my hand on the light switch. It hadn't made any sound. I hadn't heard the latch or the hinges. There wasn't anybody down there. The street was empty, just that weird orange-yellow glow on the pavement and the wet. Dark line of the fence. I told myself I just hadn't heard it because I'd had the TV on, even though the volume was low. Or maybe whoever came through left it open and I only happened to notice now. It doesn't take much for the mind to smooth over gaps in time like that. You fill in the blanks in a way that feels comfortable. I watched it for a while. 10 minutes, maybe 15. Nothing moved. No cars went by. No wind. Eventually I told myself, "You're being stupid," and sat back down. I didn't go out to close it. A week or so after that, Emily came home late from a shift, dropped her bag, and said, "Your little graveyard's got a secret admirer." I looked up from my laptop. "What?" "There are flowers out there now," she said, towing off her shoes. Like an actual bouquet. On one of the old stones, "Who visits at midnight?" Kinda weird, right? I hadn't noticed any flowers that week. It hadn't been a holiday, no anniversary thing I'd heard about. I went to the window and pushed the curtain aside. The street was quiet, just our parked car and some trash cans lined along the curb. The porch light across the way was doing its irregular flicker, like always. And there, just barely inside the halo of the streetlight, I could see a little burst of color on one of the nearer graves. "They probably came earlier," I said. You just didn't see them before work. Emily shook her head. I looked this afternoon. That stone was bare. Over the sound of her dropping pots and pans in the sink, she added, You should be happy anyway. Your neighbors are popular. Didn't say anything. It was probably nothing. Someone could have slipped by while we weren't paying attention. People have lives. They go places you don't see. The next morning, I watched from the window while I drank my coffee. The flowers were still there, bright against the gray stone. Roses, I think. The kind you'd buy last minute from a supermarket, still wrapped in crinkly plastic. A car passed once. A woman walked a dog. No one went through the gate. By the time I got home from work that day, the flowers had moved. Not far, just wrong. They weren't on the first stone by the path anymore. They were tucked neatly at the base of that one grave set off in the far corner. The lonely one with the bench facing it, except I could tell no one had walked across the grass from the path to put them there. The ground was soft from all the damp, and I didn't see any fresh impressions or trails. Just the flowers in their new spot, like they'd always belonged there. I told myself that maybe I just hadn't looked carefully in the morning. Memories like that, it edits itself. And I didn't mention it to Emily. She'd just make some joke and I didn't want to hear it. Around that time, I started noticing the insects. That sounds strange, but when you live across from a patch of green, you hear them more. In the evenings, when the street quieted down, you'd get this constant soft noise crickets and whatever else is out there. A background buzz. Some nights, for no clear reason, it would stop. Not fade out, just cut off. One Tuesday, I was sitting at the little table by the window with my laptop open, working on a backlog of scans. The radiator under the sill was ticking as it warmed up. Outside, I could see my breath fog the glass if I leaned close. The insects were going pretty loud, even with the window shut. And then, between one keystroke and the next, the sound vanished. It was like someone hit mute on the world. 1 second, there was that layered, messy noise. The next, there was just my own breathing and the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I didn't move for a second. I just sat there, fingers resting on the keys, listening to nothing. Then came this one long creak from the building's hallway. Old wood shifting. I heard the neighbor's door down below click. Someone coughed. Life went back to normal in the human sense, but outside stayed. Blanked, I stood up and walked to the window. The street looked exactly the same. Same light. Same empty sidewalk. The broken angel in the cemetery, frozen in its usual half-kneel. The bench facing that one grave. After maybe a minute, the insects started up again. Not all at once, more like one here, one there, then the rest. Until it was just noise again. That happened 3 times over the next couple of weeks. Sometimes earlier in the evening, sometimes closer to midnight. No pattern I could see. I didn't tell anyone. It sounded too small to bring up out loud. The next thing was the footsteps. On weekends, when I didn't have to go in, I'd sometimes take the long way home from the grocery store and cut through the cemetery, just to avoid the main road. The gravel path kind of bends a little in the middle, so you can't see straight from one gate to the other unless you're standing just right. You hear people before you see them. One Saturday afternoon in late October, clouds hanging low like they were thinking about rain. I came in through the far gate with 2 grocery bags, one cutting into each hand. The air smelled like cold earth, and somewhere, faintly, a wood stove. My feet crunched on the gravel, slow, because the bags were heavy. Behind me, from the other gate, I heard the path crunch too. Same rhythm, like a second set of my footsteps, just a little out of sync. I didn't think much of it. Someone else using the path. I kept walking. The crunching kept pace with me. Every time I slowed, it slowed a heartbeat after. Every time I took 3 quick steps, I'd hear 3. I realized very suddenly that I couldn't hear any plastic bags rustling or keys or the little sounds people make. Just gravel. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I turned around, expecting to see someone halfway down the path. There was no one. The gate at the far end was closed. The path behind me was empty. Just the churned-up strip of pale stones between the rows. I waited for that stupid rush of adrenaline to pass. It didn't take long. I told myself I'd heard an echo, or maybe someone had ducked off the path between stones. I couldn't see all the way down each row from where I was. "Hello," I said, feeling ridiculous. My breath made a small cloud. No one answered. A crow called once, and then went quiet again. I adjusted the bags and walked the rest of the way without looking back. After that, I started avoiding the path on days when the air felt heavy like that. There's no logic in that, I know. But you go with your gut sometimes. Around Halloween, the Historical Society put me on a project involving old cemetery records. It wasn't because of where I lived. It just worked out that way. We were trying to digitize everything: burial maps, plot ownership, handwritten ledgers from the 1800s. It was the sort of slow, detail-heavy work that usually calms me down. One afternoon, I had a stack of thin, brittle folders labeled for different little burial grounds around town. The main hill cemetery had its own thick drawer. The small ones, like the one across from my house, were in a separate box. Some were just family plots that had been fenced in a long time ago and then forgotten. I found the folder for Maple Street Vest Pocket Cemetery, which is what ours is officially called, apparently. The file was slim one-typed page, listing maybe 20 names, a rough hand-drawn sketch of the layout, and a couple of notes about maintenance. The sketch showed 3 rows of graves and a little rectangle for the bench. There was nothing in the corner where I knew that one separated grave was. I thought I had the wrong map. I checked the address at the top. Definitely our street. The drawing even showed the broken angel labeled Angel Mon, but the corner was just blank. I went down to the main desk, where Mrs. Lopez, who's been there forever, was sorting mail. "Quick question," I said, holding up the folder. "This can't be the only map for the Maple Street Cemetery, right? There's a grave in the corner that's not on here." She looked over her glasses at me. "In the corner?" "Yeah, far left if you're facing the street," I said. "There's a stone and a bench. It's there. I live right across from it." Mrs. Lopez frowned, took the folder, flipped through it with the careful fingers of someone who doesn't like surprises in paperwork. "This is everything we have," she said. "They did an inventory in the 70s. I remember this project. They were very thorough. Maybe the corner was added later." I said, "Like a new burial." She shook her head. "Small plots like that weren't taking new burials by then. Liability reasons. Besides, they'd need deed records, and we don't have anything else." I waited for her to say more. She didn't. She slid the folder back across the desk. "It's probably just a misprint on the map," she said. "We have a lot of those. Don't drive yourself crazy with it." Her tone made it clear I wasn't going to get more out of her that night. I mentioned it to Emily while we were eating cheap takeout on the couch. Maybe someone buried there wasn't supposed to be. She said, noodles hanging halfway to her mouth, like some scandal. Secret lover, covered up scandal, whatever. "That's not how cemeteries work," I said. "You're the historian," she said. "You tell me why they'd leave a grave off a map." I didn't have a good answer. The crossing, if that's what you'd call it, started small too. One rainy Thursday, I came home to find muddy prints on our side of the front door. Not on the porch inside, on the apartment floor, leading from the entry area to the window. They weren't neat boot prints, more like heel and toe smudges, as if someone had walked in damp socks across the wood. "Seriously?" I called out. You home?" No answer. The apartment was quiet. I checked her room. The sofa bed was made, her shoes lined up. No sign that she'd come home between shifts. I tried to tell myself she'd dropped by and left again, somehow tracking mud without putting on shoes. It didn't make much sense, but it was easier than the other thoughts. I cleaned the marks with a damp towel and didn't mention it. 2 days later, it happened again. This time the prints started by the back door where we never come in, went halfway across the kitchen, and faded near the fridge. The porch outside the back door was dry. No mud there at all. Emily saw them that time. She walked in behind me with a bag of groceries, stopped, and said, "Okay, that's creepy. It's just water," I said. "From the radiator or something?" She looked at me like I was an idiot. "It's footprints, Dan." "Maybe the landlord came in to check something," I said. "Didn't wipe his feet?" Then why'd they stop there? She asked. Why not go all the way to the window or something? I didn't know. We both just stood there for a minute, listening to the hum of the fridge and the faint traffic outside. I could hear the cemetery gate creak once in the wind, like it was shifting in its sleep. After that, doors stopped staying the way we left them. The bathroom door, which always swings shut on its own because the floor isn't level, would be standing wide open in the middle of the night. Light off. The little closet in the hall that we kept jammed with coats would be barely cracked, just enough that you could see the line of shadow. I started waking up around 3 in the morning for no good reason. It wasn't nightmares. I'd just find myself lying there, staring at the sloped ceiling, listening. Some nights I'd hear the radiator ticking, the occasional car. Other nights there'd be this feeling like the air in the room was cooler than it should be. I'd sit up, pull the curtain back, and look down at the cemetery. More often than not, the gate would be open. I stopped sleeping well. At work, I'd catch myself staring too long at the cemetery maps, running my finger over that blank corner on the paper. I found myself wanting to go back and ask Mrs. Lopez more questions. But every time I tried, she'd get this set look on her face, like she was bracing for something. One afternoon, while I was putting files away, she said, out of nowhere, "You're still in that place on Maple?" "Yeah," I said. "Top floor." She nodded once, very slowly. "Old properties like that collect stories," she said. "Doesn't mean you have to listen to all of them." I didn't know what she meant. Before I could ask, a volunteer came in with a question, and the moment passed. The last week before Thanksgiving, Emily started complaining about someone calling her name at night. "You do it right," she said one morning, pouring cereal. "You stand outside my door and say my name like you need something, and then when I answer, you just walk away. That's you?" I blinked at her. "What?" "No." "Why would I do that?" She gave a short laugh. "Because you're weird?" "I'm asleep," I said. "What time?" "Don't know," she said. "Late, maybe 2-3. You say it real soft like M, and then nothing. I thought you needed Tylenol or something." "It's not me," I said. For the first time since she moved in, I saw her actually look uneasy about the cemetery. Usually, she was the one making jokes. That morning, she kept glancing at the window, like she expected someone to be standing there. "That's probably my mind playing tricks," she said finally. But it didn't sound like she believed it. I wanted to tell her that sometimes, around that same hour, I'd hear my own name in the apartment. Not loud. More like someone saying it right next to my ear when I was halfway between asleep and awake. I never answered it. It felt, in a way I can't really explain, like answering was the important part. I kept my mouth shut and pretended to sleep. One night, after one of those half dreams, I got up and walked to the front window. The floorboards under my feet were cool. The air felt almost damp, even though the heat was on. Down below, the bench in the cemetery was occupied. It was just a shape at first, dark against dark. My brain tried to make it a trick of the lightest shadow from a tree, maybe. But the nearest tree didn't line up like that. The shape was too solid. I could see its outline against the lighter stone of the grave it faced. I stood there for a long time, not breathing very much, watching. The insects were completely silent again. Even the distant dog that usually barked around that hour was quiet. Eventually, the shape stood up. It didn't turn toward the street or toward me. It just sort of straightened, like someone getting up after a long sit, and then it wasn't there anymore. Not walked away, not faded. Just gone. I told myself I'd been half asleep and maybe blinked longer than I thought. It was easier than trying to really fit it into my life. I went back to bed. I lay awake until the birds started up. A couple of days later, I finally worked up the nerve to go examine that corner grave in daylight with the kind of attention I'd been avoiding. It was a clear, cold Sunday. Emily had gone to brunch with friends. The air smelled like exhaust and wood smoke. I waited until there were no cars passing, then crossed the street and let myself into the cemetery. The latch felt heavier that day. My fingers were numb from the cold, and the metal bit at my skin. The angel statue watched me with its missing half. I walked past the familiar stones, reading names I'd already memorized, stepped into the back half where the grass was uneven. Up close, the corner grave didn't look any newer than the others. The stone was worn smooth in places, like in clinging to the edges. The name was still legible, though. First name, middle initial. Last name, dates. The birth year was a little earlier than my grandparents'. It's the death year sometime in the 50s. The last name was mine, not a common name like Smith or Johnson. My actual, slightly unusual last name, with the same spelling. The first name was different, but close enough to feel like some kind of bad joke. Same initial. For a second, I felt this weird, empty feeling in my chest, like someone had pulled the air out of me. Then my brain kicked in, the way it always does. I told myself it couldn't be that strange. People traveled. Families had branches. Maybe some distant relative had ended up here, and nobody in my family bothered to mention it. Still, I reached out and touched the stone, just to prove it was solid. The surface was cold and damp under my fingertips. The letters were carved deep enough that I could feel each edge. The bench behind me creaked. I turned around fast. There was no one sitting on it. The sound could have been the metal contracting in the cold. Sure, benches do that. Things move. I stood there, hands still on the stone, and listened. From across the street, I heard our building door slam. Emily's laugh floated faintly down the block, mixed with someone else's voice. Life kept going. That night, I brought the cemetery folder home from work. I wasn't really supposed to, but no one stopped me. I spread the pages out on our table. The map still showed that blank corner. The list of names stopped 3 stones before the one I'd just touched. No mention of the matching last name. Nothing about a bench. Emily came in, saw the papers, and raised an eyebrow. You brought work to your haunted house? That's brave. Does this name mean anything to you? I asked, pointing to it. She leaned over, read it, and frowned. That's weird, she said. I mean, it's us. But not us. Does anyone in the family have that name? I asked. Not that I know of, she said. Maybe one of Dad's great-uncles or something. You could ask Mom, but she would have said something, right? Oh, by the way, your ancestor's buried across the street from you. She eats that stuff up. I nodded. You okay? She asked. Her voice was softer than usual. Yeah, I said. Just tired. We didn't talk about it again. A few days went by. The insects kept doing that thing. The gate kept opening. The footprints stopped for a while. I started to feel like maybe it was all in my head after all, a season of nerves and not enough sleep. You can convince yourself of a lot if you need to. Then, one evening as I was coming up the stairs, I ran into our downstairs neighbor. Mr. Keene, he's lived in the building forever. The kind of guy who notices everything without making a show of it. He was wrestling with a bag of rock salt by his door. You're the one in the attic, he said, like we were just starting the conversation in the middle. Yeah, I said. Daniel, he nodded once. You seeing much of them yet? I wasn't sure I'd heard him right. Excuse me. He jerked his chin in the direction of the front window, where you can just see the top of the cemetery gate if you stand in the hallway. Across the way, swallowed. It's a cemetery, I said. Stones and trees. Same as always. He looked at me for a long second, like he was checking whether I was lying or just stupid. Then he said, Those graves aren't what you think they are, and picked up the bag again. What are they then? I asked. He shook his head. Not my place, he said. I don't sleep under that roof. That night, the hallway light clicked off earlier than usual. I didn't bother turning it back on. I just went into the apartment, locked the door, and sat at the table with the cemetery papers spread out in front of me again. The radiator banged once, twice, then fell quiet. I don't know what I was waiting for. Some kind of realization, a detail I'd missed, something that would make all of it snap into place and turn into a story I could tell with a beginning, middle, and end. Around midnight, Emily went to bed. I could hear her moving around, closing the bathroom door, the squeak of the sofa frame as she lay down. Then it was just me in the living room, the glow of the lamp, the faint sound of cars out on the main road. At some point, the insects outside went silent again. The refrigerator hummed louder in the emptiness. I became aware of the cold on my ankles. Like the warmth from the radiator wasn't making it all the way up. From the hall, I heard my name. Not loud, just a calm, normal voice saying it. The way someone does when they're trying not to startle you. I knew it wasn't Emily. I could hear her snoring. Faintly, behind the closed door, I didn't answer. The floorboard just outside the living room creaked, the one that always complains when you step on it. Then, very softly, the sound of bare feet on wood. Moving toward the window, I sat there, hands flat on the table, and stared straight ahead. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see an empty room and have to decide what that meant. I focused on the papers in front of me, on the neat typed lines of names that stopped too soon. After a while, the air around me felt less cold. The insects outside stuttered back to life. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked like nothing had changed. I finally got up enough nerve to look out. The cemetery gate was closed. The bench was empty. The corner grave sat in its usual place, a small shadow in the dark. When I turned my head just right, I could see the edge of that stone and part of the bench from where I sat at the table. It lined up almost exactly with the reflection of my own shoulder in the glass. For a second, I had the strange, clear thought that the bench had been placed on purpose, so that someone up here would always be facing that grave without meaning to. I don't have proof of anything. I still go to work, still walk past boxes of old papers and maps that insist that corner doesn't exist the way I see it. Emily still makes jokes, though less often now. Mr. Keene stops talking when I come up the stairs. Life goes on. I've stopped trying to figure out who is sitting there, or why the insects go quiet, or why the footprints never quite make it all the way to the window. There's probably some logical answer tangled up in history and wiring, and the way old houses hold on to things. I don't know what those graves really are, or who that name belongs to, or why the map pretends it's not there. All I know is that, no matter what time I look, even on the coldest nights, when no one should bother, the flowers on that grave are always fresh. My name is Caleb, and I'm from Stillwater, Minnesota. I've lived here most of my life, on and off. It's one of those river towns people drive through in the fall, because the trees look nice, and the old brick buildings photograph well. For me, it's just home. Cold in the winter, sticky in the summer, quiet most nights. You can hear the trains on the far side of town if the wind's right. They kind of fade into everything else after a while, a couple of years ago. I moved back after a breakup and ended up renting a small 2-story house on the edge of town. It was cheaper than anything closer to Main Street, and the landlord liked that I had a stable job. I work as a claims examiner for an insurance company, mostly from my laptop at the kitchen table. Going through paperwork and photos and arguing with adjusters over email. It's not exciting, but it pays on time, and nobody bothers me much. The house sits on a slight hill across from a modest Victoria-era cemetery. Hillview Cemetery is what the stone sign says, even though the hill is barely a rise. It's not big. You could walk the whole length of it in a few minutes. There's a low brick wall along the street, the kind a person could step over if they really wanted to. With a gap in the middle and a gravel path that runs straight back. Near the front, it's neat short grass, trimmed bushes, a couple of maple trees that turn bright red in October. The farther back you look, though, the more tangled it gets. Tall grass, patches of weeds, stones at weird angles. It's like somebody got tired halfway through. Most of the graves are family plots, same last names in little clusters. Near the middle, there's a patch like that for stones all with Harlan on them, lined up in a row. Then, off to the right and farther back than makes sense. There's one single stone by itself, maybe 10 or 15 feet away from any others. First time I noticed it was my second day there. I remember thinking whoever was buried there must have pissed somebody off to end up alone like that. I don't live alone. My cousin Lauren moved in a few months after I did. She'd gotten a job at the hospital over in Hudson and needed a place fast. We weren't super close growing up, but we get along. She works odd shifts, sometimes nights, sometimes early mornings, so we pass each other like roommates on different schedules. We split rent, groceries, that kind of thing. The house itself is nothing special. Old wood floors that creak in strange places, a radiator that knocks when the heat kicks on, a screen door that never quite shuts without a little hip bump. In the evenings, if I'm not on overtime, I sit on the front porch with a mug of coffee or a beer and watch the light fade over the cemetery. My porch light is on a motion sensor, pointed toward the street. Cars go by, the light kicks on, then off again. In the summer, you can hear insects buzzing and sometimes dogs bark from down the block. It's all pretty normal. At first, the cemetery didn't bother me at all. If anything, it was kind of peaceful. There's usually a breeze coming down from that side, moving the trees. The air smells like cut grass in the warmer months, and like cold stone when it gets chilly, if that makes sense. On Sundays, you sometimes hear church bells from downtown. Around the same time, you see a couple of older folks walking slowly through the rows, stopping here and there. It felt respectful, quiet. Background noise? Lauren made jokes about it from day one. When she first carried her boxers in, she stood on the porch, looked straight at the graveyard. Out, at least the neighbors are quiet. I rolled my eyes. She still says stuff like that when she's tired. If the house pops or the wood settles, she'll go, "Okay, Grandpa, we hear you," and nod toward the cemetery. It used to just make me laugh. I had a routine for a while. Wake up, coffee on the stove, log into work by 8, break around noon to walk around the block or down to the gas station for a sandwich, back to emails until 4 or 5. Lauren would come or go depending on her shift, keys jingling, shoes thumping on the steps. At night, either I'd cook something simple or we'd order takeout. Some nights she'd drag me out to the little bar by the bridge. Some nights we'd just sit in the living room with the TV low, the glow from the porch light bleeding a little through the curtains. All of this is just to say it was normal. Boring, even. The cemetery was just part of the view, like the river would be if we lived closer to downtown. I got used to seeing stones and trees every time I glanced out the front window. The first thing that really stuck in my mind happened on a windy afternoon in early October. The air had that cold bite but wasn't freezing yet. I'd just stepped out onto the porch to make a call. Lauren was sleeping after a night shift and I didn't want to wake her. As I stepped out, the porch light flicked on, even though it was broad daylight. I guess the sensor got confused by the way the clouds were moving. The wind was pushing dead leaves down the street, scraping them along the pavement. You could hear them skitter against the brick wall. I was halfway through the call when I noticed the flowers. They were on one of the Harlan family graves, the second from the left. I'd looked at those stones 100 times and never seen anything on them. That day there was a bunch of white flowers, maybe lilies. I don't know, flowers well stuck into a metal cone holder. The petals were bright, fresh, not drooping. My first thought was just, someone finally came by. I didn't think much more about it until the next day, when I saw them again. I was on my way to the car, gravel crunching under my shoes, as I cut across the little pull-off area across from the house. A gust of wind carried the smell from the cemetery damp earth, cold leaves, that faint sweet smell from the flowers. They still looked fresh, which made sense. It had only been a day, but that afternoon, I was on the porch again. Scrolling my phone when a pickup rolled slowly past and stopped by the gap in the brick wall. An older guy got out, dog on a leash. He walked partway in, the dog's paws making tiny crunching sounds on the gravel, then turned left, away from the Harlan graves. He just did a quick loop near the front and came back. When he passed the Harlan row, I watched him, didn't see him glance even once at the flowers. That was the first time I thought it was a little odd. Not creepy, just odd. Fresh flowers always catch people's eyes. That night the wind picked up. The branches in the cemetery shifted against the sky, shadows moving. Lauren and I were in the living room, the TV low. Around 9, the motion light flicked on. That wasn't unusual. Sometimes a car's headlights or a stray cat would set it off. But it stayed on. We both noticed at the same time. "Your light's stuck," Lauren said, not looking away from the screen. "I'll check it in a minute," I said. We waited. The radiator knocked somewhere in the walls. The TV murmured. The light stayed on, bright in the corner of my eye through the curtains. Finally, I got up, went to the door, and pushed the curtain aside a little. The street was empty. No car, no person. The wind was still moving the trees, leaves scraping along the pavement. The light glared down on the gravel pull-off and the first row of stones. As I watched, the light went off. Just like that, I stood there a second longer, listening. Insects had gone mostly quiet for the season. Somewhere farther away, a dog barked once and then stopped. When I mentioned it to Lauren, she shrugged. "Sensor's probably going bad," she said. "Or there's a raccoon out there planning his next trash can raid." Little things like that kept happening over the next couple of weeks. The porch light would come on when no car had passed. I started checking out of habit to pawn the curtain, look at the street, see nothing. Sometimes it would flick on just as I was walking past the front window, before I even reached for the curtain. Once it snapped on while I was sitting at the kitchen table, my laptop open, the scent of reheated coffee in the air. I hadn't moved in minutes. It was the middle of a boring claim file. Nothing stressful. The light just came on. It made the house feel like it had flinched. The flowers changed too. The white ones wilted and disappeared one day. Didn't actually see who took them away, but the very next afternoon, there was a new bunch on the same Harlan grave. Different flowers this time, more color. I walked down the front steps, the screen door creaking, and pretended to check my mailbox so I could get a closer look. The stems were wrapped in green tape. There was no card. I started paying attention after that. Every time I stepped outside, I checked that row. The flowers never got truly old. They would just reach the point of starting to droop, and then within a day, they'd be replaced. Even when it rained and the wind was nasty, there were always fresh flowers. I never saw anyone bring them. One Saturday afternoon, I was walking back from the gas station, a plastic bag rustling in my hand. When I heard someone say my name, Caleb, it was soft, like someone calling from a backyard. I stopped at the corner by the cemetery and looked around. The street was empty. There was a car parked one block down, no one inside. The air smelled like cold exhaust and damp leaves. A crow cawed from somewhere up in the trees, then another answered. I stood there a second longer, listening. Nothing. I told myself it was somebody across the next street calling to a kid or a dog, and I just heard it wrong. I kept walking. The gravel at the gap in the brick wall crunched under my shoes. As I passed, I glanced toward the Harlan stones. The flowers were there, bright and neat. The single stone, off to the right, the one set apart, caught my eye again. I realized I'd never actually read that name. Later that week I did. It was after dark. Lauren was working a late shift. I'd been staring at my laptop for hours, the house quiet except for the occasional pop of wood and the hum of the fridge. The motion light kept flicking on and off every so often, making the street glow and then fade again. Around 10, I finally shut the laptop and went to stand by the front window, just to rest my eyes on something that wasn't a screen. The light clicked on. I could see the brick wall, the first couple of rows of stones. The Harlan plot was right in the center of the beam. The flowers on the second stone shone pale. That one solitary stone farther back was just on the edge of the glow. I don't know why, but something in me wanted to read it. I'm not the kind of person who wanders through cemeteries at night, but it didn't feel like that. It felt like crossing the street to check the mail. Routine. I slipped on my shoes, grabbed a jacket, and went out. The screen door creaked behind me, then clacked shut. The air was colder than I expected, enough that I could see my breath. The light hummed softly above me, my shadow stretching long ahead as I crossed the street. My footsteps sounded loud on the gravel, then more muted when I stepped onto the grass. Up close, the cemetery felt different at night. Not scary exactly, just very still. No bugs, no birds, no cars. Even the usual distant train sound didn't seem to be there. I could hear my own breathing. The smell was damp, like wet stone and soil. I passed the Harlan stones. George, Len, Marcus, Rebecca, all from around the turn of the century, all with the same death year, except one. The flowers were on George's. The single stone off to the right was newer than those, but still old. The carving was worn a bit at the edges. The name on it made me blink. Lauren Harlan, it said. I stood there a second, a little half laugh catching in my throat. Lauren is my cousin's first name. Harlan is not our family name. It was just a coincidence. People share names all the time. Still, seeing Lauren cut into stone like that, with dates from the 1870s, twisted my stomach a bit. I crouched down, the cold seeping through the knees of my jeans. There were no flowers on that grave. The stone leaned just slightly, like it had been slowly giving up over the years. There was a little green staining near the base from moss. I brushed some dead leaves away without really thinking about it. My fingers came away cold and a little damp. A breeze moved through the trees above me. For a second, I thought I heard my name again, very soft. It might have just been the leaves. I straightened up, shoved my hands into my jacket pockets, and walked back to the house a little faster than I'd walked over. That night, the motion light stayed on longer than usual. It kept catching me in the corner of its sensor as I moved around the kitchen, which I told myself was the reason. A few days after that, Lauren mentioned the flowers. We were both off that morning. She'd made toast, and I was standing by the sink, rinsing out my coffee mug. Sunlight was coming in at an angle through the window over the sink, catching dust in the air. Across the street, the cemetery looked almost too bright. You ever go over there? She asked, nodding toward the window. Sometimes, I said. Walked through a couple times. Why? She chewed a bite, then shrugged. Just curious. I've been watching that one grave. You know the one with the flowers? They're always new. I never see anyone put them there. Kinda weird. Felt my shoulders tense. People probably come early, or when we're at work. She shook her head. I work weird hours, remember? I'm driving in at 4 in the morning, coming back at midnight. That kind of thing. I'd see headlights at least. It's right in front of the house. You're not looking all the time, I said. Anyway, what does it matter? She gave me a small look like she wanted to say more, then let it go. Neighbors, she said. Everyone's got their thing. Later that day, I went to the county records office during my lunch break. It sounds dramatic, but it wasn't. It was more boredom than fear. I'd gotten stuck on hold with someone, and it freed up my afternoon. The office is in one of those brick buildings off the main drag. Smelling like paper and old coffee, the woman at the desk was in her 50s. Glasses on a chain, name tag that said Jan. I asked about cemetery records for Hillview. Said I was just curious about the history of the place. She seemed fine with that. Pointed me to a corner with a couple of binders and an old computer. I flipped through the binder labeled HJ. There was a section for Harlan. George, Ellen, Marcus, Rebecca. Plot numbers. Dates. There was a note that all 4 were in the same family section. Nothing about a Lauren. I went back a few pages, then forward again, in case I'd missed it. No luck. Finally, I went up to the desk. Hey, Jan, I said. Do you have anything on, Lauren Harlan? That's what the stone says anyway. Out in Hillview? Her fingers, which had been tapping at a keyboard, stopped. She looked at me over her glasses. For a second, I thought maybe I'd broken some rule by digging around. What do you want that for? She asked. I shrugged. Just curious. I live across from the cemetery. I've been looking at the names for months. Never heard of that one. She watched me a moment longer. Her gaze flicked to the window, where you could see just the tops of some trees. Then she shook her head like she was shaking something off. Those records are old, she said. Some of the stones don't match the paperwork. Some people paid for markers later. We don't have everything. She started typing again. The conversation was over. Okay, I said. Thanks anyway. On the way out, as I passed the door, I heard her murmur something, but I didn't catch the words. When I glanced back, she was staring at her screen. After that, things felt slightly off at the house. Not dramatic. Just a little misaligned. I'd set my keys on the kitchen counter and later find them on the small table by the front door. There were muddy marks, once on the hallway floor in the morning, like someone had stepped in with damp boots and then half wiped them away. It hadn't rained the night before. When I asked Lauren about it, she frowned. I came in the back, she said. I always do when I'm on nights. I don't even lock the front. Too tired? That's reassuring, I said. She rolled her eyes. We're across from a cemetery, not a nightclub. Another night, around 11. I was in my room upstairs going through a stack of claim photos when I heard the front door open and close. The screen door creaked, then thumped. Footsteps crossed the living room, up the stairs. The motion light flicked on, light seeping through the curtains in the hall. Hey, I called. How was your shift? The footsteps stopped halfway up. No one answered. I waited a second, then got up and opened my bedroom door. The staircase was empty. The downstairs lights were off. The only glow was from the motion light outside, showing a band of brightness across the front room carpet. Lauren? I said silence. Then from the back of the house, the faint hum of the fridge kicked in. The radiator tapped once in the wall. I pulled out my phone and checked her location. We share it for emergencies. She was a dot, still at the hospital. I could see the little last updated 8 minutes ago. Maybe she'd left her phone there, I thought. Maybe she'd already come home. I stood there in the dim hall, listening for the sound of the shower or her door closing. Nothing. I walked downstairs, turning on lights as I went. The front door was locked. The screen door was shut. When I stepped out onto the porch, the motion light clicked off above me, plunging the cemetery into dark except for a faint wash of light from the street lamp at the corner. The air smelled cold and still. I could hear very faintly a train horn way off. And then it faded. I went back in, locked the door again just to be sure, and told myself the footsteps had been the house settling. With moves, it echoes differently at night. I went back upstairs. It took me a long time to fall asleep. A couple of weeks later, Lauren had a run of early shifts, leaving the house around 4:30 in the morning. Those mornings I'd wake up briefly to the sound of the screen door whining and the car engine turning over. One of those days I drifted back to sleep and had one of those half dreams where everything feels slightly wrong. The sound of gravel, a door opening, muffled voices. When I finally got up, the house was quiet. Light was weak through the blinds. I shuffled to the kitchen, bare feet cold on the floor. There were 2 coffee mugs in the sink instead of 1, both with fresh rings at the bottom. Lauren had only used 1, and I hadn't been up yet. I stood there, looking at them, listening to the radiator knock 3 short times in the wall. Down the street, a dog barked and then cut off like someone hushed it. I turned toward the front window. The porch light was off, but the air outside had that flat gray look before the sun really gets going. Across the street, the Harlan stones were easy to see, even in the dimness. There were flowers again. The bunch on George's grave was bigger than usual, bright reds and yellows like somebody had gone all out. The single stone that said Lauren still had nothing, that stuck with me for some reason. All that attention on one stone, and nothing on the one with my cousin's name. It felt backwards. I started to notice other things. The insects around the house, the few there were in late fall, would go quiet all at once sometimes when I stepped onto the porch, like somebody had hit mute. Then, a few seconds later, they'd start up again. The porch light had a new trick where it would flicker once, little hesitant blink. Whenever I opened the front door after dark, even if I didn't trigger the sensor, the worst was the voice. I was working late one evening, pushing through a stack of files to meet a deadline. The house was quiet except for the soft tick of the clock in the living room and the occasional groan of the old wood. I had the TV on low in the background, some cooking show nobody was really watching. Around 10:30, I heard Lauren say, "Caleb, can you come here a second?" It sounded like it came from upstairs, near the bathroom. Her tone was normal, maybe a little tired. I pushed my chair back, rubbed my eyes, and stood up. "Yeah, just a second," I said. I went to the bottom of the stairs and looked up. The hallway light was off. Her door was shut. The bathroom door was open a crack with no light on inside. "You okay?" I called nothing. The hairs on my arms went up. I pulled my phone out again. Her location showed her still at the hospital, little by the river. I watched it for a good 30 seconds, waiting for it to jump to home. It didn't. I went up anyway, turning on the hallway light. The air at the top of the stairs felt cooler, like a window had been left open, but they were all closed when I checked. The bathroom was empty. I opened Lauren's door a little. Her room was dark and still, bed made. On my way back down, I glanced out the small landing window. From that angle, you can see deeper into the cemetery, past the neatly kept front. Moonlight, pale and thin, showed the back half where the grass is taller and the stones crowd in at strange angles. For a second, I had the strong sense that someone was standing just inside the line where the neat part ends, not moving, just watching the house. There was nobody there, just the shapes of stone and tree trunk. A chipmunk chattered once, then stopped. I went downstairs, turned off the TV, and sat at the kitchen table with the lights on for another hour, not really working. I kept listening for footsteps that didn't come. Not long after that, Lauren changed how she talked about the cemetery. The jokes stopped. One morning, as she was lacing up her shoes near the door, she glanced out the window and went very quiet. "What?" I asked. She hesitated. "Nothing," she said. "Just, did you move the flowers?" "What flowers?" She pointed. "Those, they were on the second stone yesterday. Now they're on the one at the end." I looked. She was right. The big bunch that had always been on George's grave was now on Rebecca's, all the way to the right. The arrangement looked the same. Same colors, same shape. They hadn't been replaced. They had been moved. "I didn't touch them," I said. "Probably the groundskeeper," she said, but her voice sounded thin. "They don't have a groundskeeper," I said. "Not full-time. The city sends someone out once in a while to mow. That's it." She made a face, grabbed her keys, and shook her head. "Whatever. I gotta go." After she left, I watched the graves for a while. No one came by. The flowers stayed where they were. I don't know exactly when. I started connecting the inside of the house with what was going on across the street. It wasn't one big thing. It was a slow accumulation of small, annoying, easy turret-off moments. The front door would be unlatched in the morning when I was sure I'd locked it the night before. The back door would stick like something heavy had leaned against it from the outside, and suddenly give way with a little sigh of air. Sometimes the smell of damp earth would drift through the front hall even when it hadn't rained for days. One afternoon, working at the table, I dropped a pen. It rolled across the floor and stopped by the doorway to the hall. I reached down to grab it and noticed faint brown smudges on the wood just inside the doorframe. They were shaped like half moons, spaced like steps, not clear footprints. Nothing that exact, but enough that I could follow them with my eyes, a broken path toward the front door, and then nothing. They stopped a couple of boards short, like someone had just lifted their feet and vanished. I cleaned them up. What else do you do? I told myself I'd tracked in dirt without noticing. Maybe I had. It's a house. Messes happen. The closest I came to an explanation or something like one was from the guy at the corner store. His name's Rick. He's been there forever, I think. Knows everybody, or at least acts like he does. I'd gone in late one evening to grab milk. The bell over the door jingled. The place smelled like coffee and fryer oil. He was leaning on the counter, watching a little TV. "Hey, Caleb," he said. "Still liking the place by Hillview?" "Yeah," I said. "It's fine." "Cheap for what it is," he said. "Not many folks want to look at headstones every morning." I hesitated. "Do you know anything about that family?" "The Harlans." He grunted. "Old money. Old drama. They're mostly in the ground now. There's a stone out there for Lauren," I said. "Lauren Harlan." I couldn't find anything about her in the records. He stopped scanning my milk and looked at me in a way that made my stomach feel hollow. It was just a second, then he looked away. "Those graves aren't what you think they are," he said quietly. "What does that mean?" I asked. He shook his head, rang up the milk, and slid it toward me. "Means you shouldn't spend so much time looking at them," he said in his normal voice. "You'll start seeing patterns that aren't there." On my walk home, the plastic jug cold against my hand, I kept hearing that line. Those graves aren't what you think they are. The air was sharp, burning my nose a little. As I turned onto my street, I saw my porch light flick on before I was close enough to trigger it. The house looked darker than usual behind the light. That makes sense. Inside, the wood popped once, like something shifting its weight. Over the next few weeks, I tried to ignore it all. I buried myself in work. I stopped looking at the cemetery every time I passed the window. I focused on ordinary tasks, dishes, laundry, emails. But the disturbances kept edging in. I'd hear that soft scrape of gravel outside. The front door when nobody was scheduled to come by. Once, I woke up around 3 in the morning to the sound of our screen door creaking open, then very slowly closing. When I went to the window, heart pounding in my throat, the porch was empty, the light just turning off. I told myself it was the wind. The last thing that really settled into my bones happened in late November, just before the first real snow. The air had that heavy feeling, like the sky was holding its breath. Lauren was working nights again. I was on the couch, not really paying attention to whatever was on TV. The radiator rattled, then went quiet. Outside, the trees in the cemetery were bare, branches scratching against each other when the wind moved. For no good reason, I got up and went to the window. Habit, I guess. The porch light clicked on as I reached the curtain. Even though I hadn't opened it yet, I pulled the curtain aside and looked out. The Harlan graves were there as always. The big bunch of flowers had moved again. They were on the solitary stone now. On Lauren. The petals looked new, no edges browned or curled. No other flowers on any of the other stones. Just that one. For a long moment, nothing moved. The street was empty. The only sound was a far-off train horn and the faint rustle of dead leaves scraping along the curb. Then, yes, I watched. The motion light went off. You know how your eyes adjust slowly? The cemetery faded into a softer darkness. The solitary stone was just a pale shape now. I could still see the flowers in my mind, bright and fresh, where they hadn't been before. I thought of the extra coffee cup in the sink, the muddy half-prints on the floor, the voice upstairs saying my name, the gap in the records, the clerk's tight mouth, Rick saying, "Those graves aren't what you think they are." Behind me, the house creaked, just once, like someone had shifted their weight on an old step. I tell myself there's a person who comes very early, before I wake up, to tend that grave. I tell myself the voice I hear sometimes at the top of the stairs is just my own brain replaying things. I tell myself the footsteps, the doors, the cold spots, the little moved objects are all normal parts of living in an old house across from an old cemetery. Most days, I half believe it. I don't go back into the cemetery at night anymore. I don't ask at the county office. I don't bring up the name on that stone with anyone in town. I don't mention to Lauren that a few times now. I've seen her stand at the window in the early morning, looking across the street with a strange, distant expression, like she's trying to recognize someone. I just watch, from my side of the glass. As the seasons change and the flowers keep appearing where they shouldn't, always new, never wilting long enough to be forgotten, the house settles around me. The trains come and go. The gravel outside shifts on its own, and across the street. On that one grave set apart from the others, the flowers on that grave are always fresh,